He had wished to speak to his uncle after the meeting, but he could see there was something upsetting Marjorie, and so, after promising his uncle he would speak to him as soon as he finished, he had gone with Marjorie and Olenna to Olenna's room. He had tried to reassure her along the way, but for whatever reason, he found that while she smiled, she never seemed to relax. Once inside the room, he took a seat and was upset to see she sat closer to her grandmother than to him, and so when he spoke, his tone was far harsher than it should have been. "What's going on?" he asked, and Marjorie gave him a startled look, which made him shrink back in his chair. "Marjorie, please, what is it?" he asked, far softer this time. "Are you competing in the joust?" she asked nervously. "I am, me and Loris both. Why?" "And if I asked you not to?" she said. And he looked at her, not sure why she was looking so scared. "I don't understand. Why would you not wish me to compete?" "Littlefinger," Olenna said, making him turn to look at her. "My lady?" "Lord Baelish met me outside my room. What he said, John, how he said it, I think he planned something against you in the joust." Marjorie said. "What did he say?" John said and tried to keep his anger in check. Thankfully, it was Olenna who spoke. "He tried to suggest he was bringing this," Olenna said, holding up a piece of paper and handing it to him. "From that spoiled prince as an apology, that we were all mistaken, and he's not a sadistic little shit, but a hero trying to protect my granddaughter," Olenna said with a snort. "And about the joust, that perhaps given your age you shouldn't compete, that one never knows what may happen," Olenna said. And John calmed himself before going over to Marjorie and kneeling down in front of her chair. "Marjorie," he took her hand and looked up at her. "He can't influence the joust in any way. The draw, we can change who does it at the last moment, so he has no influence. I could have him watch so he doesn't get to speak to whoever I would face. I don't want you to compete, John," she said, looking at him, and he looked to Olenna, who nodded before he took her in his arms. "Do you trust me?" he whispered. "You know I do. You know I do. I promise I'll be well. I need to do this, Marjorie, to be seen to do this. Loris does too, but I swear it will both be unharmed. If I even think for a moment that there is some danger, I'll cheat," he said, as she moved from his arms looking at him. "Cheat?" she asked. "I'll warg into my opponent's horse, have them ride away," he said, and she smirked. "You can do that?" "Of course I can. If I even for a moment think myself or Laura's are in any danger, then prepare to laugh,"
he said, and she smiled more, true now.
"I mean, what could be funnier than seeing a horse suddenly run off in a completely different direction?" he said, and finally got a laugh. "Promise me you won't take any risks?" she asked. "I promise." He hugged her again and rose to his feet, walking over to the table and handing Olenna back the note. He never even bothered to read it, knowing that it wasn't Joffrey who wrote it. Looking at the woman, he mouthed that they'd speak later and walked back over to Marjorie. "I think it's time we went to our beds," Olenna said, and he nodded. "I need to speak to my uncle. Can we meet before you break your fast on the morrow?" he said to Marjorie, who nodded eagerly. "Lady Olenna, Marjorie." "Probling," he said then as he walked from the room. As soon as he rounded the corridor, he moved his fingers from his palm, surprised to see there was no blood there, as he'd been pressing them hard against it as he spoke. He closed his eyes and he breathed deeply and reached out for Ghost. The White Wolf was hunting with some of the pack, Greywind, Laya, and Nymeria with him, while Dusk, Summer, and Fang slept in their rooms. "Protect the pack," he whispered, and felt the White Wolf give him his agreement, and he knew he'd go to Marjorie's room when he returned. "John?" Arthur asked, and he shook his head to suggest there was nothing to worry about. "We need to speak to my uncle. I'll explain this later," he said, and Arthur nodded as they walked to his uncle's room. Littlefinger hadn't threatened him. He doubted he was even making such a threat to Marjorie. What he had done, though, was scare her. He'd hit upon a fear she would no doubt have. Given Willis's injury, she and her family would be concerned about Laura's competing, him too, and Littlefinger had managed to hit that nerve. The question was, why? He knew how the man felt about him. He'd arranged for him to be killed once already, but he doubted he'd make a move here. It was too hard to control. To fix the lists and then find an opponent you were sure to face was much too difficult. He could try something with Winter or his equipment, but John would know if he had, so no, he wasn't actually trying to hurt him. More, he was playing on Marjorie's fear, and it was then that it hit him, he knew? He knew of them, or he suspected at least, and he thought then of what Olenna had said and felt a fool. As he reached his uncle's room and knocked on the door, though he shook that from his head, he had plenty of time to deal with Littlefinger, and he suspected it would be far easier than what he was about to do anyway. "John, Uncle," he said, walking into the room. He could see his uncle looking at him both eagerly and with a large amount of nervousness, while he himself only felt the latter. "I didn't wish to tell you this, to speak to you on it. I had hoped that you'd never need to find out." "This is what we spoke of in the Godswood?" his uncle asked. "Aye, it is. Tell me, John," his uncle said determinedly. He sighed as he began to tell his uncle it all. The attack in the Riverlands, how the men were SOC and had been paid for by Edmure, and how they believed that Lady Catelyn had asked her brother to arrange it. "John, you cannot know this. You cannot be certain of this. On this, no. On what happened in the West, though there is no doubt. John," he told him then of Bronn, of Richard watching Littlefinger, of seeing Lady Catelyn and him together, and of hearing of the plan being made. How Richard had arranged for it to be their man who was hired, and how Littlefinger had used one of his brothel managers to act as the go-between. When he explained the mummery and the reason behind it, how Edmure had shown his pleasure and raised a toast to his death, he saw his uncle's expression quickly change. "How have you let them live, gods? John? I'm sorry, his uncle said, shaking his head. "You have nothing to be sorry about, Uncle. She's my wife, John. She's my wife and Uncle. How can you be so calm about this? How are you not screaming it out loud? We've just ordered the deaths of how many men? Why are you not doing the same here, Littlefinger, Edmure, Cat? I don't." "John," his uncle said. And while there was anger in his voice, there was hurt and confusion too. "For 300 years, people have plotted to kill my family, Uncle. They've sought to end our line. A line which as of now is me, an aunt who is somewhere in Essos, an aged uncle stuck at a wall of ice, and a sister who's somehow a dragon. For 300 years, my family has been killed off, manipulated, drawn into wars, and conspired against. Even now, I don't know the full extent of what was the Maester's fault and what was our own hubris. John, you think I've not thought it? I've not thought of taking Littlefinger and seeing him fall, of bringing Riverrun and House Tully to the ground? I'm a dragon, Uncle. Of course I've thought of it." "Then why have you not?" "Because I'm not only a dragon, I'm a wolf too. Littlefinger will pay when it serves me best. Edmure will pay when it serves me best. And Cat?" his uncle asked worriedly. "Is the mother of my brothers, the mother of my sisters. If I hurt her, then I hurt them. And while it may be unavoidable, I'm trying, Uncle. I'm trying," he said as he shook his head. "I'm trying to think of how it could be." They sat in silence for a few moments afterward, neither knowing what to say and neither wishing to be first to speak. In the end, it was his uncle who did so. "They can't know," his uncle said. "I know. A part of me wants to ride to Riverrun, to drag them both out and take their damn heads myself." "You can't, Uncle, should you see her. You can't speak of this." "I know. You wish me to be a wolf," his uncle said, looking to him. "You are a wolf, Uncle." He got up from his chair and walked over, placing his hand on his uncle's shoulder, feeling his uncle's hand reach out and touch his own, and after nodding, he turned to walk to the door. "You shouldn't have had to face this, John, this life. It shouldn't have been the one you had. It's the only one I could have had, Uncle," he said, a soft smile on his face as he thought of Rainie's words. "I am here for you, John, always." "I know. I'm most grateful for it. Uncle, good night." "Good night, nephew." High Garden 295 AC, Jeddah. She had enjoyed the tea immensely. Knowing that Lady Allery was no longer in the dark was a weight off her mind. She liked the woman, and felt it wrong that she didn't know the truth, so finding out she did was something she was happy about. The tea itself had started benign enough. Soon, though, talk had turned to her niece and grandnephew, and she knew then Jamie had been right. The war had always been coming. "Ladies, I'm glad you could all join me today," Ollery said. "We're most happy to be invited, sister," Vanessa answered. "Ah, my nephew is with his cousin being looked after by my good sisters," Lindsay said, and she looked to Daisy, who actually seemed relaxed to be away from Joanna, even if only for a few moments. "How are you enjoying the tourney, Lady Jenna?" Ellery asked. "Apart from the race, I'm enjoying it very much." "What's wrong? Did you bet on the wrong horse?" Daisy said, chuckling, which made her chuckle too. "No, only someone who's not seen John ride would bet against him. I mean, no offense to the rest of those riders, but only my niece could have given him a match today." "Your niece?" Lady Olenna asked. "Joy. She's the closest I've ever seen to him. He's had her up on a horse since she was far too young for it," she said, smiling. "Speaking of John," Lady Ellery said, "I take it all. You are aware of certain truths?" she asked, and seemed relieved when everyone nodded. "We are, my lady," Daisy said. "Please let's use names here. I'm all for formality when it's proper, but by the gods, if it's not a chore," Ellery said to laughs. "Thank the old gods for that, Ellery," Maygay said to a smile from the other woman. "Does everyone know of John and my daughter?" Ellery asked, and they all nodded. "They are good together. They'll be the king and queen we need," Valeria said. "Better than the king and queen we have anyway," Olenna said to some chuckles. "Jenna, forgive me, but your niece, her son, I don't. The other two, Marcella and Tommen, they seem a different sort?" Mage asked. "Cersei was always spoiled. No, that's not it. We all were. She is a law unto herself. She has always thought herself above everyone else, far above, and it seems to be something she has allowed her son to think also." "There is more than that wrong with that boy. Forgive me, Jenna, but you know it's true," Olenna said. "I know. It was my niece he tried to attack Olenna. He's lucky I wasn't there at the time. Had I been, then Geryon would have been fighting for me and not a wolf," she said to laughs. "Ladies, we can't do much about the crown now, but we have a chance to do something in the future," Ellery said to a surprised look from Olenna. "Ellery?" Olenna said. "John, Marjorie, you all know what they did in Flea Bottom. Jenna, Lannisport, I know it's your nephews and brother who've been responsible for a lot, but is it not John who's the reason why the small folk are doing better? He is. The coin, the improvements, trade, some of it would have come without him, but Castamere, and the ships have changed it. He's doing the same with the North, Bear Island, White Harbor, even Wintertown," Meiji said, and it was her daughter who asked the question back, Daisy not having heard of the changes, it seemed. "Wintertown. It's been built up. More people are moving to it. It's now a proper town, soon to be a city." "That's my point." "Ladies, with John, with my daughter, they already wish to change things. I've no doubt that when they're on the throne, they will also," Ollery said. "What is your point, Ellery?" Olenna said grumpily. "My point is, we have a chance to be influential in some of those changes. Marjorie will listen. John will listen. We'll have a king and queen who care. Shouldn't we care also? Shouldn't we play a role in the changing of the realm?" As she walked down the corridor, she smiled. For a woman who, according to herself and to Olenna, cared not for politics, Ellery had a knack for them. She'd hit on something they'd not thought of. Eris was mad. Given how he treated Rhaella, he'd never listened to her suggestions. Robert and Cersei were different, but even if Robert would, Cersei was not someone who'd do anything to help the realm. Marjorie, though, John already listened to, and John himself he listened. He may not take your suggestions on board, he may go a different way, but he listened, and if you were right, he accepted it. They had more than a chance of not just having a good king and queen, but of actually changing things, something which had her excited by the possibilities. "Is my niece inside?" she asked he Kingsguard when she reached the door. Her Grace asked not to be interrupted. The dead-eyed man said, "I think she'll see me," she said, leaving no room for questions and watching as the man knocked and then walked into the room. It took a few moments for her niece to get ready, and when she was finally allowed inside the room, she could smell the wine already, her niece slurring her words when she greeted her. "Aunt, it's so good to see you. I've been meaning to catch up." "Have you, indeed? I've come for one reason and one reason only, niece, and that's to tell you to get a grip on that boy of yours. Do so before others do," she said angrily. "How dare you? I am your queen. You are the same spoiled little girl you've always been, and yet despite it all, you were never unnecessarily cruel or violent. That was my niece. Your monster of a son pulled a knife on my niece, your very own cousin, and as for whichever of you put that fool Blount up to what he tried to do to my brother, gods, if your father was allowed to see that. Father would have taken up for Joffrey. He was in the right. That wolf scarred him. It scarred my boy." "Scarred? Where is he?" "Let me see this scar you're so concerned about, and if you think your father would have approved of what Joffrey did, then you're further gone than I thought. Prince or no prince, your father would have punished that boy, not coddled him. All of you are in it together. I'm a Lannister too, and yet you've all left me alone," Cersei whined. "Ooh. Maybe if you acted a Lannister we would not. Mark my words. Cersei, if one hair on my niece's head is harmed, one hair, if that boy of yours even looks crooked at her, then I'll show you the meaning of our words. Believe me, niece, you do not want to hear me roar." She watched as her niece huffed and then reached for the wine glass, and she shook her head. Leaving the room, she walked further down the corridor and hoped the fat stag was only drunk and not entertaining when she reached his rooms. "Sir Barristan, is his grace presentable?" she asked. And the knight smirked when he nodded. "He is Lady Jenna. If you'd wait a moment." She waited until the knight returned and he escorted her into the room. The fat stag was drunk, yet he seemed in good spirits, and at least seemed capable of speech, which she welcomed. "Your Grace," she said, biting her tongue as she curtsied to the false king. "Lady Jenna, to what do I owe this pleasure?" he said, meaning anything but. "I was wondering, Your Grace, with the joust on the morrow, if I would be allowed to escort my grandniece and nephew to it. I'm sure my children would love to meet the prince and princess, and they may have more fun sitting with other children than alone." "Aye. That sounds like a good idea, Barristan. See to it that Horp knows Myrcella and Tommen will be accompanying Lady Jenna to the joust tomorrow." "I will, Your Grace," Sir Barristan said. "I thank you, Your Grace," she said, curtsying yet again as she turned to leave. Jon wished Tommen to be his squire, and Myrcella would be marrying Brandon Stark. It was time she paid more attention to her grandniece and nephew, and perhaps with luck, she could get them to be allowed. Come visit the Rock too. High Garden 295 AC. Joy. She had laughed at the others in the crowd when they had talked about who would win the race. Only apples could beat Winter, and even then only when Jon let her win. One day she beat him for true, but sometimes he'd let her win, and she could have easily beat all the others. She had even asked her papa to let her race, but he wouldn't. When she had seen Jon leading, though she had cheered and soon so had everyone else, but she had seen him first, she had known he would win. When he read her the story that night, he told her that they could have a proper race when they got back to the Rock, and that he'd not cheat and let her win, and she had almost wanted to leave right then. She was missing Apples and Balin, and unlike the other night, she didn't have Ghost with her tonight, though she was now no longer scared of the prince. Dusk had bitten him and Papa had to fight to save him, and she had been so relieved and happy when he'd won, just like he and Jon promised he would. Now she was dressing for the joust, and she wondered if she'd get the flowers again. Her cousin had given her them last time, but she thought he may give them to Lady Dacey or to Joanna if he won again. Yesterday's joust had been no fun. No one she knew was riding in it, but today would have a lot. Even Jon and Loras would ride, and so she looked far more forward to going. "Do you wish your hair up, Lady Joy?" Mara asked. "Yes, please," she said. And the woman tied her hair up. "All done," Mara said a few moments later. and she looked and smiled at herself in the looking-glass before she made her way to break her fast. She stopped as she entered the room, seeing one of the men in the white cloaks, the king's guard, standing at her table. Was Papa in trouble? Was John? She looked to see that John wasn't there. Cragen or Loras weren't there either. She was about to leave when Aunt Jenna called her over, and so taking a breath, she walked to the table. "I am Lady Joy Hill. I'm not afraid," she said over and over to herself as she walked, and then she stopped, seeing the blonde boy and girl sitting at the table looking at her. "Joy, this is Princess Marcella and Prince Tommen. They'll be joining us today." "Your Grace," she said first to Marcella and then to Tommen, curtsying to both. "Lady Joy," the princess said, smiling. Sitting down at the table, she looked to her aunt, who was smiling at her, and then to the prince and princess who were looking at her, and she knew what she needed to do. "Will we have candied apples today, Auntie?" "Maybe." "Candied apples, yummy, princess," she said, smiling at the girl, who smiled back. "Pen nuts, too. You like pen nuts?" she said to Tommen, who looked confused before she explained how yummy pen nuts were. As she ate, she played and found the princess and prince liked to play too. She was about to stop her game when Ghost came in, and then the king's guard, who seemed to have been nice, moved when Tommen made a noise. "Ghost to me," she said, and the wolf walked to her. She reached her hand to the plate and grabbed a sausage. "Ghost loves sausages. Yummy, Ghost," she said to the prince and princess as the wolf ate the sausage, and she reached for another when John walked in and took his seat. "There you are. I should have known you'd run here," John said to Ghost before looking at her. "Morning, Joy." "Morning, John. Prince and Princess John," she said with a smirk as she nodded her head in the direction of Marcella and Tommen. "Forgive me. Where are my manners?" John said, rolling his eyes at her. "Prince Tommen, Princess Marcella in honor," John said, and as she leaned down to give Ghost another sausage, she giggled. "You're John? You won the race?" Tommen said, and John nodded. "Aye." John said as Tommen and Marcella giggled. "Is Ghost yours, Sir John?" Marcella said, and she wondered why she called John Sir. John wasn't a Sir, he was a John, just a John. This lazy sod, aye, he's mine, though truth be told. And she sat up when he began to lean in close to them and whispered, "He's anyone's as long as they feed him sausages. Want to try?" he asked, and both the prince and princess nodded. "I don't think that's a good idea, Your Grace," the king's guard said to Marcella. "I give you my word, Sir Richard. Ghost won't harm the prince or princess. I swear it on my honor," John said. And the king's guard nodded as John told him to grab a sausage and feed Ghost. By the time the others arrived, both the prince and princess were laughing as Ghost licked their hands when they stopped feeding him, John then talking to them about the day's jousting. They had finished eating, and yet no one wished to get up from the table until the others did, and she saw John speaking to Sansa and Arya and then to Cragen before he and Laura stood up to leave. "Cragen will get you your pen nuts, Joy. I'll see you later, my prince, my princess," he said as he left. And she was happy that Ghost was staying with them rather than going with him. "Is Sir John not taking Sir Ghost with him?" Tommen said, and she shook her head. "Ghost likes pin nuts too, Tommen," she said, and he giggled. When they were done, they got ready to ride to the tourney grounds. It wasn't far, and she was glad now that Marcella and Tommen were joining them. They arrived, and she was surprised they'd be sitting with them too. But as they took their seats, she felt excited to see the joust begin. Loras and John wouldn't be riding for a while, but Oberyn would, Jaime would, and she had many people to cheer on. "Pin nut Ghost," she said, throwing the peanut to the wolf, and he gobbled it down quickly, looking to her for more. "Pen nut? Sir Ghost?" Tommen said softly a moment later, and when the wolf looked at him, he threw the peanut to him, laughing as Ghost ate that one too. High Garden 295 AC. Ned. He had not slept well. No, that was a lie. He had not slept at all. Hearing what John had said, knowing the truth of things had been almost more than he could take. When John had left, he had rushed to the privy and emptied the contents of his stomach. He had retched as he got sick, as he felt the bile in his throat. Then as he lay down on the bed, as he tried to clear his mind, he found himself unable to. He had known, deep down inside, he had known the letters, the ravens, what Lewin had said, what the Blackfish didn't, he had known. House Tully had tried to kill his nephew. They had played a role in the death of his brother and his sister too, and had he access to Dragon like his nephew did, then he'd have had no compunction about seeing River run in flames. He needed to know of the Blackfish, the truth of him. No way would he allow his son to be squired to him if he played a role in this, though again, deep down, he knew he had not. Still, he had taken a walk to John's room and had found Arthur and Walder on guard, leaning close into the night. He had asked for a moment to speak to him. Arthur, leaving Walder to guard the door, and both of them walking to a small garderobe. Once they were sure they'd not be overheard, he had asked, "The Blackfish, is he part of it?" "No. We think he may have suspected, may even have known afterward," he argued with his nephew. "With your wife, too. But he is not a part of it, nor did he approve as far as we can tell," Arthur said, and he breathed a sigh of relief. "He wishes to squire Bran. John knows this, Stark. He approves. So you think I should allow it?" "I think the Blackfish is a good man. Out of all that family, the only one who ever was." "I didn't know," he said, shaking his head. "I know that. But you still did wrong by him, by your sister. I know. I'm trying to make amends. That, and because you're his kin, is why you still breathe, Stark," Arthur said, leaving. He was in no mood for the meal that morning, so while his children broke their fast, he sat in his room, and he may have spent the day there even with the joust to go on if Janelle had not come to speak to him. "What's wrong, Ned?" "Many things. I wish I could speak on it, and maybe someday I can, but not today," he said, and was happy when she left it at that. "We're getting ready to leave. Can you ask Robb and Sansa to come to speak to me? I'll bring them with me, and we'll meet the rest of you there." "I can. Are you sure you're well, Ned?" she said, reaching out and touching his arm. "I am El, thank you. We'll speak later," he said. And she nodded. He had put this off enough too. He knew both his children wished to know why he'd set Cat aside, and he had thought to come up with something that wouldn't make them think badly of their mother. He didn't wish to drive a wedge between them, even if it seemed that Cat was doing that enough herself. Given what he now knew, he needed them to be certain of how things were. The truth, but not the full truth, he thought as his children entered the room. "Robb, Sansa, take a seat. We need to discuss your mother." To say it was difficult was an understatement. He told them of the things she said of John, seeing both of them look unsurprised, and he wondered, had she been saying it to them too? Sansa's letter had suggested it, but still he wondered. When he told them of the betrothal, something Robb didn't know, of how long their mother had been away from home, of what she'd said when she returned, and of the letters, though not to whom they were sent, they were shocked. "She came to me in White Harbor, and she argued against Winifred and me, said it was part of John's plan," Robb said, catching him by surprise. "It was the same when she was here, John. The Tyrells, all of them were plotting against us, all of them to take Winterfell from Robb. What she said about John, about the wolves," Sansa said, shaking her head, and Robb looked to her. "About the wolves?" Robb asked. "When we thought John had died, when we got the ravens. I was upset, and she comforted me. But later, as I slept when I was in Fong, she wished them dead, just like she did John," Sansa said. And while Robb gasped at the part about John, he found himself thinking of the part about Fang. "When you were in Fong, you're a warg," he asked his daughter. "We all are. Haven't you had wolf dreams?" "I have, but—" "I have too, but you can control it?" Robb asked eagerly. "John taught me how, and once you know it's easy," Sansa said as she closed her eyes. "Fang is waiting with Grey Wind and Leah. They're at the end of the corridor playing with Jory." "Wait, you just did it?" he asked, shocked. "Aye, father," Robb asked. "We can speak to John a bit later. If he taught Sansa, then he could help us too,"
he said, and Robb nodded. "About your mother."
"I understand, father. She's my mother still, but I understand," Robb said, and Sansa nodded. "I'm sorry," he said, and Sansa got up to hug him. "It's not you who should be father," Sansa said, and he felt himself breathe easier at that. "Come, we'll be late. Your brother is competing in a joust of all things, he said to last from both his children. They decided to walk to the tourney grounds, the wolves running ahead of them, and as they reached it he saw him walking towards him, a man he had no wish to see, a man he had avoided since he'd gotten here. He saw Sansa look at him strangely and then close her eyes, and he wondered if she was reaching out for her wolf. Lord Stark, Lord Robb, Lady Sansa, I'm so glad I've bumped into you. I was just heading to the tourney. Littlefinger said, and Ned felt that to be a lie. He was waiting, but whether it was for him or his children, he didn't know. He was about to push past him when the wolves arrived, and he looked on as they growled, as the man began to sweat, and surprisingly, as Sansa smirked. Robb, Sansa, why don't you go to our seats? I'll be along in a moment. Yes, Father, Lord Baelish, Sansa said curtly. And then Robb and the wolves walked away quickly. He looked as Littlefinger watched them leave and then turned to him smiling. Strange animals. Wolves. Pack animals. Lord Baelish, you should be wary of animals that hunt in a pack. I've seen them tear an elk to pieces in moments. Have you ever seen the size of a fully grown elk? He said, enjoying the fact the man smirked no more. I had hoped to speak to the children. Lord Stark, Lady Catelyn and I are very close. I'm sure she'd love to know what her children have been up to. Indeed. Well, you've spoken to them. If my wife wishes to know of them, she can write. Cat was always very fond of writing, if I remember correctly, Littlefinger said, smirking once again. He moved quickly, his hand on his throat pushing him against the wall, and he began to squeeze, watching as the color left the man's face. Behind him, he heard swords being drawn as Jory and his guards faced off against the two that Littlefinger had brought with him. You're a funny man, a very funny man,
he said, glaring at the man as he squeezed, and then he let go, allowing the man to gather his breath.
You should be careful, Lord Baelish. Some people may find your humor offensive, he said as he moved away. Stark's quick tempers, slow minds. He muttered, and Ned turned back, moving to him once again. A clever man or a man whose temper is up? Which do you fear, my lord? And think long and hard before you answer. A clever man may cause you problems, but a man with a temper will end you, he said, moving away. I'll give your wife my regards, Lord Stark. Give her what you like, Lord Baelish, I care not, he said as Leah arrived back and looked at him, and then Littlefinger, the wolf, walking over and climbing up on the man who was now shaking, her paws either side of Littlefinger's head as she snarled at him. Lie it to me, he said, and heard the wolf growl once more before she was back by his side, and they walked away. High Garden 295 AC, the joust, Sir Barristan. He had not really had a chance to spend any time one-on-one with the king, though he had, as the meeting came to a close, had a brief moment to speak to Arthur and Jon. The king telling him that he'd find a time and place for them to meet privately before the tourney ended. Now, though he was walking to the tent and a part of him wished to talk the boy out of it, tell him no, though he was his king and it was not his place to do so. Competing in an honor joust was one thing. Competing in a tourney against knights, against some of the knights that he could face here in an open draw, was quite another. As he arrived at the tent, he nodded to Sir Walder. The man who would be his brother one day had impressed him in the melee, and he would be proud to wear a white cloak with him. Sir Walder. Sir Barristan. Is there anyone inside? He asked, hoping Walder knew what he meant. Jon, Loras, and Sir Daeron, Sir Barristan, Walder said as two hedge knights walked by. Inside the tent he found both boys putting on their armor, Arthur standing there speaking softly to the king. When they saw him, he saw Jon smile while Loras tied up the king's breastplate. Sir Barristan. It's good to see you. You too, Jon, he said, knowing it was better not to take the chance with so many people milling around outside. I take it just like Sir Daeron, you've come to ask us both not to compete. I have, Jon. I understand the wish to compete in a tourney, and while your horsemanship, and I have no doubt Loras's is up to the task and may make you feel ready, taking a lance from each other in your practices is far different than taking one in a proper joust. Which I've been trying to tell them, Arthur said as the tent opened and Jaime walked in. My lord, it seems I now have 2 knights telling me not to compete. Will you be joining them? Jon asked, a smirk on his face. Me? I want to face you and knock you on your arse, Jaime said, and both boys laughed. It's dangerous, Jaime, he said. And Jaime nodded. What age were you again, Barristan? Were you Daeron? I was 3 and 10 when I rode my first, and even then it was only because I had missed the one when I was 2 and 10, Jaime said. It's different, Jaime, he said, and Jon looked at him. Forget who I am. Would you have come here for Loras or Barristan? Jon asked, and Barristan was ashamed to shake his head. Nobody loves me, Loras said, getting a chuckle and an arm around his shoulder from the king. I love you, ugly though you are, Jon said, and Loras laughed. He had to admit he enjoyed the banter. Were it not for the knot in his stomach and his worry over who Jon was, he'd have played a part in it himself, as it was, though he reluctantly nodded. Come, it's time to see the lists. Let's go find out who we're facing, Jon said, picking up his helm, and all 5 of them walked from the tent. It turned out he was facing a Frey, and Loras laughed, though Sir Perwyn was not a typical Frey, which he soon told them, and didn't like the excited look which then appeared on Jon's face. Loras was drawn against the Hedge Knight, while Jaime had drawn Lord Jan Royce, and he, the Blackfish. Much harder opposition than they'd expected. First off, who did I get? They heard the voice behind them as Oberyn arrived. The Red Viper. Someone he hadn't known how to take, knowing he was close to Jon, had surprised him. Seeing how close, though, had soon removed any doubts of the man's intent. Sir Lyn Corbray. I'm going to enjoy this, Oberyn said, making him wonder why. He's one of Littlefinger's friends, Arthur whispered in his ear. As they moved back to the tents to wait to be called, Jon walked over to him, the others walking a little distance in front, and he spoke very softly. I appreciate your worry, sir, but I need to do this. For me, I need to ride. I wish to. I'll not take any chances, but I want to do this, Jon said, and he saw him touching the small ribbon. Do you have someone you'd crown? He said, smiling, and he enjoyed the little blush that appeared on his king's face. Sir, I may be confident, but I'll not tempt fate, Jon said, and he chuckled, knowing that he'd already picked his queen. Then I wish you good fortune, Jon. And you, Sir Barristan. It was Loras who was up first, and he watched on, standing close to the king, but not too close. Jaime and Arthur standing beside Jon as his friend took the tilt in 3 rides. The boy's lance work was excellent, and his riding, though not on a par with Jon's, was pretty good too. His own ride was next, and he lined up to face his old friend, the Blackfish, a man he only respected now even more, given what his house was involved in and his own attitude towards it. Charging down the field, he saw his king look on expectantly. He heard the roar of the crowd, and the lance struck home, though the Blackfish didn't move. The next tilt was the same. The lance broke, and still no movement from the Blackfish. On the third, he caught him with as good a shot as he had hit, and it almost unseated him. The fourth, it seemed, would be the one, and he was right, and he looked on as Brynden got to his feet and nodded. He was unharmed. Riding back, he saw the king on his horse, and he eagerly dismounted and rushed back to see him ride, keen to see him return safely. Arya. Jousting was not as much fun as the melee, but she had a bigger reason to cheer today, as her brother would be riding soon. She had enjoyed the ride so far. A fat knight from House Frey had fallen almost without being hit, to much laughter in the crowd. Lord Beric had beaten a Royce from the Vale. Someone her father had cheered on while seeing Loras ride and beat a bigger man had been fun. Sir Barristan against her granduncle had allowed her and Lyanna to get their own back on Bran for cheering for him during the melee, while he was family and Bran would be squaring for him. Lyanna and she had been cheering for Daisy, and hearing her brother cheer when she was beaten had annoyed them, though they knew he was right to do so. So seeing him fall to the bold had allowed them to annoy him back, though her stupid brother had only laughed, saying, "It was the bold, the best knight in Westeros." Now, though she moved to the edge of her seat when she saw Jon and Winter come out, the shield he held in his hand wasn't the one she'd heard about. She'd have loved to see that one here. Instead, it was just Ghost alone, with no fish in his mouth. He'll beat him for sure. she said to Lyanna as the knight from the twins rode out. What if he doesn't? She heard someone say, and she turned angrily but couldn't find who it was. Before she had a chance to really look, she turned back, and the horses were riding down towards each other. The sound of the lance hitting the shield seemed even louder than it had been just the ride before. He's hurt? She heard someone say, and she looked on worriedly as Jon leaned back in his saddle, barely holding on as Winter rode on. Jon, she shouted, and was happy then to see him right himself. And soon they rode again. She felt her mouth dry up, her heart begin to race, and she looked on as Jon's lance hit, and then she found herself standing and cheering, as did everyone around her when they saw the knight fall. Jon just stopped his horse and looked down to see the knight rise and nod his head, and then he looked towards them, and she found herself laughing as she sat back in her seat. I told you he'd win, she said. And she sat there smiling and looking forward to his next ride. She watched Sir Jaime beat Lord Jon in 6 rides, both men almost coming off in the 3rd and 4th, and then she felt the hush in the crowd as the Red Viper rode in. She liked the prince. He had laughed with her. He mussed her hair as Jon did, and he let his daughters fight. He was also friends with Jon, and so she cheered him on as he looked to the crowd. His horse was decked out in bright yellow, his shield the sigil of his house, the gold spear piercing the red sun on a bright field of orange. She found she liked the colors. She liked the sun, even if it made her sweat too much. As the prince rode, she wanted to see the other man fall, though. She didn't know him, but she didn't like him already, and she was glad to see him move in his horse on the first ride. She liked the rest of the crowd were stunned on the second ride. What the prince did with his lance was unusual, and hearing the gasps, she wondered if it was even allowed. Instead of aiming at the shield, the prince aimed it at the horse. It forced the knight to pull the reins, and when he did, the lance rose to catch him in the chest, and as he flew from the horse, he landed hard on the ground. What was that? She said, turning to Lyanna, who looked as clueless as she was. I don't know, but Prince Oberyn won, Lyanna said, and she looked around to see the crowd looking at the prince oddly. The knight got up and moved a little stiffly, but Oberyn was already gone, and she wondered if the man had done something to upset the prince or his daughters, or was it just how he rode? Oberyn. Corbray, being one of Littlefinger's men, raised his ire, so much so that at one point he thought of aiming to do far more harm than he did. In the end, though, he decided to go for the horse, to make it look like he was being dishonorable and for it to give him the opening he wished for. Since his lance would hit the horse, first Corbray would need to pull his reins, and as soon as he did so, Oberyn switched up, catching him flush in the chest. He would feel the pain of that for a few days at least, and when he rode back, he found Jon waiting for him. He expected to see some annoyance, some judgment. Instead, he found his nephew smiling at him. Climbing off his horse, he walked with Jon to watch on as some of the other competitors took to the field, and they were soon joined by Lord Beric and his squire. Jon, it's good to see you again, Lord Beric said. You too, my lord, you rode well. I thank you, Jon. I missed your own ride, but then I missed you in the horse race by some distance also, Beric said with a chuckle. Have you met Prince Oberyn, my lord? No. An honor to meet you, my prince. My betrothed and squire are also from Dorne. Ned, come over here, Beric said, and the small boy came over as Oberyn greeted the man. Ned? Jon asked. Lord Edric Dane, Jon, Beric said, and Jon looked to him. Lord Dane, Jon said, and the boy looked to him, and then Jon, and seemed nervous. Lord Jon, my prince, Ned stammered. No, Lord Dane, though Prince Oberyn really is a prince, Jon said with a smile on his face which seemed to put the boy at ease. I'm sorry, Jon, Ned said, and Jon's smile was even broader now, and so the boy relaxed even more. My lord, my prince, if you'll excuse me, Ned, I wonder if I could speak to you a moment about your uncle and his sword, Jon asked, and Ned looked eagerly to Beric, who nodded. Watching them both walk away, he was left with Lord Beric, and he wondered if Jon was talking with Ned about Cregan, and had the boy seen him, or Arthur, or did he even know of them? He was about to follow when Lord Beric began to speak, and he found himself laughing with the man, until Jon came back with Ned, the young man seeming far more comfortable with his nephew now. It seems the next round is to be posted soon, John. Prince Oberyn, perhaps we could speak later? Beric said. I'd like that, my lord, young Ned. You're a credit to your house, and it's a true pleasure to meet a fellow Dornishman here, he said, and the boy looked to him as if he'd given him Dawn itself. My prince, he said as he walked away after his lord. Interesting man, Lord Beric, he said, as he and John walked. Most interesting, a Stormland's lord. Most interesting indeed, John said, and he chuckled. And here I thought you were just being friendly. Oh, I was my prince, John said, and he laughed properly now. He shuddered when he saw the list, and then he laughed at both the excitement on John's face and the jealousy on Loras's. Both boys had drawn Kingsguard, but Loras had drawn Sir Aris Oakheart, while John had drawn the Bold. As for him, it seemed he and Lord Beric would be getting reacquainted much sooner than he'd have liked, and Jaime was to face Lord Renly. The Bold, you got the Bold, Loras said, and John laughed. Want to swap Loras? Can we? Loras asked before he realized he was being japed. What? I hate you, Loras said, chuckling. He was up first, and so he wished them both luck, and mounted ready to face Lord Beric. It only took 2 lances, and he unseated him easily, though he rode it fair and used no tricks, and the lord took it in good spirits and was thankfully unharmed. He made his way back and walked up to Arthur, who was looking on as John rode out. I met your nephew, he whispered. John spoke to him. I kept my helm on, but he invited him to the rock. Is that a good idea? I don't know, but my sister is to marry the man he squires for, and he's bound to see Cregan here. It may be for the best. It may, Oberyn said. As for this, he said, looking out as Barristan and John faced off. Reckless, Arthur said, annoyed. Brave, with smirk, Marjorie. Between her grandmother and John, they had calmed her down some, reassured her, and as she had gone to her room that night and dressed for bed, she had been feeling a little better. When she heard the scratching at her door, she had thought it to be Fang. She found herself smiling when she opened it, and it was Ghost that walked in, the white wolf looking to her before moving to her bed. She had thought it was John warging, but even finding out it had not been, that it was just him having sent Ghost to comfort her, she had been more than happy, and so had snuggled comfortably beside the wolf that night. John had come to her room early the next morning to fetch the wolf, and to once again reassure her, even going so far as to tell her if he didn't compete, how could he crown her? I don't need a crown if it puts you at risk, John, she said, and he leaned in and softly kissed her lips, the kiss far too short but understandable given where they were. I would not put myself at any more risk than necessary. I promise, Marjorie, both I and Loras will be safe. I'd not see you hurt by allowing myself to be. The first few jousts had her calming down some more. She saw each competitor rise after they had been unseated, and so she felt her nerves gradually recede, though she was not the only one to look on nervously when Loras rode. He did so excellently, and she, along with her brothers and father and mother, cheered, while her grandmother smiled a small, proud smile. When it was John's turn, though, she felt her nerves rise again, and as the 2 lances crashed, she saw him move so far back in the saddle that she had thought him lost, and she would have been happy if he not rode again. Though even through her nerves, she felt a little swell of pride when he righted himself for the second tilt. Seeing him knock Sir Perwyn from his saddle, she rose to her feet cheering. Thankfully, so did pretty much everyone, so she didn't look out of place. That was an excellent ride, Willis said beside her, and she felt her brother grab her hand. It was most excellent, she said, smiling. She heard Willis's chuckle while others practically hissed at Oberyn's ride, and she wondered why Oberyn seemed to be riding dishonorably only to see it be a mummery and to watch him win. By the time it came around for Oberyn's second ride, the news had reached them of the draw. Loras was to ride against the Kingsguard, and she knew her brother would love that. But it was knowing John was to ride against the Bold, which had her calming down almost fully. When the time came and she looked out as the 2 of them faced each other, she knew that the Bold would be honorable, he would be fair. So now the danger that John faced was the normal danger one would in a joust, and while that was still much, it was far lesser than against someone wishing you harm. Barristan's horse was decked out in the colors of the Kingsguard, the white barding tinged with the 3 stalks of wheat to signify his house. Winter, on the other hand, was completely bare but for the saddle, and she felt her heart in her mouth as they rode towards one another. The crashing of the lances had her closing her eyes, and when she opened them, she saw that both had hit home, but John remained seated still. She felt more comfortable with the next one, and she thought she saw Barristan move a little, but she wasn't sure. By the third, she was watching eagerly, the lances practically smashing as they broke against the shields. She could hear the king sing John's praises, and the crowd too, seeming surprised. With the 4th tilt, she saw John move in his saddle and putting everything he had into the thrust. And then Winter was riderless. John seemed to almost float in the air while the horse ran off, the noise of the hit still reverberating around the grounds, and then came the crash as he fell to the ground. "He's hurt," she heard someone say. "He's not moved," she heard someone say. It took her a moment to realize it as she who'd spoken, and by that time the bold was off his horse helping John to his feet, and as she saw them walk, as she heard them laugh, she was glad it was over. She looked on as John spoke to the bold and then looked back to the stands. His helm was off, and he seemed to be looking to her, and so she smiled, seeing him smile back before he turned to nod at something the bold said. "He did very well. 4 lances against the bold. People will talk," Garland said. And she found that though she was proud of her future husband, she cared more for his safety than of what people thought of him, John. Flying was not all it was cracked up to be, he thought jokingly, as he and Barristan walked back to the tent. He had been doing well, he thought, managing to deflect rather than absorb Barristan's lances. He had even felt the knight move, which was why he had put so much effort into this thrust, and he had left himself open in the process, something that Barristan told him as they arrived at the tent. "I got to break lances with Sir Barristan the Bold. That, sir, is a dream come true," he said as the knight smiled. "You are sure you are unhurt?" Barristan asked. "I am, sir. Go. I wish you good fortune. I'll need to hurry to see Loris's ride." Once the knight was gone and he was checked over by Jaime, Arthur, and even Walder, he was thankful that Loris was getting ready for his own ride, or no doubt he'd be checking him too. He was quickly helped out of his armor, and he arrived at the yard just as Loris was riding out, wishing his friend well as he nodded when he passed. Loris, though, didn't need it, and he beat Sir Eris and 3 to very loud cheers, John himself cheering even louder than most. Watching Jaime face Lord Renly, he for some reason wished to see the man on the ground. He knew Renly had danced with Marjorie, and he wasn't sure if it was just jealousy that he felt. Whatever it was, he didn't need to wait too long, and Renly was beaten in 2. He even felt some concern for the man when he heard the crack as he hit the ground, only for it to be one of the gold antlers on his helm. When he saw the next lists, he worried for Loris. Seeing him face the Strongboar, he felt he had no chance. Jaime, too, was facing one of his men from the west, and Sir Adam and Prince Oberyn was to face Sir Roland Storm, while Barristan was facing Sir Richard Hort once again. He squired for both Loris and Jaime, helping to ready their horses and making sure their armor was polished, even while they wore it still. "You really don't have to do this, John," Jaime said. "I am your squire, am I not? Besides, I can see better from down here anyway," he said. And Jaime chuckled as he readied for his ride, standing beside him and handing him the lance. He readied himself to watch the ride and was surprised by how cleanly Jaime caught Sir Adam, the man losing in one, though good-naturedly as always. John grabbed the man's loose horse and brought it to him after he'd gotten back to his feet. "I hate facing him,"
Sir Adam said, smirking as he and John walked back to the tents.
and John handed him back his horse's reins. "Well, at least we both walked away unharmed, Sir Adam," he said. And the knight chuckled as he walked off. He helped Loris prepare and felt more nervous about this ride than any of his own. He had managed to do as he promised Marjorie as far as he was concerned, but he needed his friend to be unharmed too if he was to keep the promise fully. Wishing him well, he paid even more attention to this joust than he had to any of the others. He was ready to ward for what good it would do, and as he heard the lances crash, he saw Loris move but stay seated. The Strongboar, though, brushed it off as if it was nothing, Loras caught him twice more, perfect shots to the chest, and yet they didn't move the man an inch. On the fourth, he caught him with a shot that was even better, and the man at least was knocked back some. But it was clear his friend lacked the strength to unseat him. Something the fifth tilt showed as once again he caught him flush, though it was Loras, not Lyle, who was knocked from his horse. He was moving before John had a chance to, and so John grabbed his horse and then helped his friend walk a little gingerly from the yard. "Are you well?" "Damn, that hurt." "You caught him perfectly, Loras, each time. I've never seen such good work with the lance," he said. And Loras smiled as the strongbow rode over. "Do you really think so, John?" Loras asked. But it was the booming voice of Lyle Craighall they heard. "Well done, lad. Had you more weight or strength, I'd be on the ground. You should be proud of your performance today." "I thank you, Sir Lyle," Loras said, and John could see how prideful his walk became then as they reached the back. The gingerness now was gone and the pain quickly forgotten. Jaime fell in the semifinals to the bowl, John doing as he had the last time they met, taking his place in the stand so he showed no favor. While not as epic as their tilt in King's Landing, it was still an excellent ride, and as John sat amongst his family and with joy making sure he was unharmed every few moments, he tried his best not to laugh.
"Ouchie, John."
"Ouchie, John. No ouchie. You sure?" she asked, raising her eyebrow. "Ooh, sure. You get pen nuts, Joy." All gone, we get more? Maybe later. Maybe we'll get a candied apple before we go back," he said, making her smile and seeing both Arya and Lyanna stare at him eagerly while Sansa just smirked. Oberyn faced off against the strongbow who had surprised many by making it this far, and Jon looked to Ellaria and his cousins who looked on eagerly. 5 lances it took, and while Loras may not have had the strength, his uncle suffered from no such shortcoming. When it came time for the final, he looked on nervously, hoping for the result he wished for. "Who'll win, Jon?" Bran asked, and he saw Craig and Robb look on with interest. "Who do you think will win?" he asked. "The bold. No one can beat the bold." Bran said his hero worship for knights clear. "Even me,"
he said, and while the others chuckled,
Bran thought he was having a go at him and began to apologize. "No, you could have. I cheered for you, Jon. Honest," Bran said, and Jon reached over and mussed his hair. "Thank you, little brother, and there's nothing wrong with thinking who'll win. But look, it's about to happen. Let's see if you're right." The 2 horses rode fast, and it was the bold's lance which hit better, the same on the second and the third tilt. It took to the 4th for Oberyn to get a hit of equal measure, and the 5th was a draw. The bold was almost immovable, almost solid, and Oberyn, it seemed, was getting frustrated, given how he grabbed the lance, as the 2 raced for the 6th. It happened. The bold's lance hit flush, and Oberyn flew from his horse. He heard Illaria's gasp from where he sat and then looked on as Oberyn seemed to roll on the ground before he basically popped up on his feet once the roll was done. He looked to his aunt to see her relieved smile, and he, like the rest of the crowd, cheered Sir Barristan's victory. "Your graces, my lord and ladies, I give you the victor of the joust at the tourney of Highgarden for Lady Margaery's name day, Sir Barristan Selmy, the bold himself." The herald set even louder cheers. He watched as the bold rode to the garland, and then he picked it up on the end of the lance before he rode to name his queen. "Lady Margaery, I would name you the queen of love and beauty," Barristan said, and Jon saw first her smile, and then the surprised look on her face when she saw it, her smile beaming even more. "I thank you, good sir," Margaery said as she looked towards him. A small nod was all she did, but it was enough for him to know she'd seen her favorite tied to Barristan's belt. "My queen," he thought to himself as he watched her put the garland on her head. She hated this place, and had done since she had arrived. The roses were far too sure of themselves and far too disrespectful. They should have been on their knees thanking her in gratitude that she had convinced her precious boy to even spend time with their less-than-golden rose. Instead, they, like so many others, looked down upon her, upon Joffrey, and she once again cursed her father for leaving her alone in this world. She knew, had he been alive, that the sheer fear and respect he commanded would, as was rightly so, have been afforded to her also. But ever since he had gone and gotten himself killed by a damn ironborn pirate, she had been left to watch as her position was gradually undermined. That most of that undermining came from her own family, only making it that much harder to take. The little bastard daring to speak such a way to a prince, her uncle calling them out publicly and shaming them so, and her aunt daring to come to her rooms to threaten her. She was the queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and yet she'd been powerless to do or say anything about it. She had needed to sit there and listen while a woman married to a damn Frey had looked and spoken down to her. Well, no more, as she dressed, as she readied herself to break her fast and hoped her husband to be too hungover to join her, she resolved to show them she was a lioness too, starting with her fat aunt. She finished her wine, looked at herself in the looking-glass and smiled, younger and more beautiful, as if there could be such a thing, she thought. Mother. She heard Marcella say happily when she walked into the room. She smiled at her sweet girl and looked over to see her baby boy eating happily. Good morning, Marcella. Tommen, is your brother not joining us? She said, and didn't notice the small frown on her daughter's face. He's with father, they were shouting. Tommen said while Marcella shook her head at him. Marcella? She asked, worried about what her fat oaf of a husband may be doing or saying to her precious boy. Her daughter, though, didn't get to answer as both Joffrey and Robert chose that moment to walk into the room. She could see her boy was furious, and she swore she could see a red mark on his face. But she shook her head. Even the beast that she was married to would never dare strike her son. As they sat down, she looked to Robert and to Joffrey. Neither was speaking, and her curiosity forced her to ask what had happened. However, it was to Marcella that Robert spoke to before she could even open her mouth. I heard from Sir Richard that you spent some time with the White Wolf, Robert said, smiling. What? Her child had been near that beast. Where were her Kingsguard? What was Horp doing? We did, father. Sir Ghost is so fluffy he's even softer than Sir Pounce, Tommen said, and Joffrey snorted only for Robert to glare at him. Is that so? Well, at least one of my children knows how to behave around a wolf. What about you? Marcella, did the wolf scare you or threaten you? Robert said, looking to Joffrey again. No, father. Ghost was most fun. He even licked our hands, Marcella said, giggling, and Lady Joy and Sir John were most friendly. They bought us peanuts. Pen nuts, Tommen said, and Marcella giggled again. Sir John? Robert asked, looking confused. Giant Snow, father, Marcella said, and her husband laughed. Bastards, bastards and beasts. Her children were being allowed to be close to bastards and beasts. No, this could not stand. I don't wish you near those beasts anymore, either of you. They are far too dangerous and need to be put down. Look what they did to your brother, she said angrily as both her children looked down to their plates. You've just heard from their own lips just how friendly the wolf was. If that doesn't show what our fool of a son did even more clearly, then nothing will. It's not the damn wolves that need to be leashed, Robert said and glared at Joffrey yet again. Robert, this is no place for this conversation, she said, feeling her anger rise. Yet you felt the need to have it here anyway. So, let's have it then. Marcella, would you like to spend more time with the wolf? Would it frighten you to do so? I would, father. I wasn't scared, her daughter said. And while she felt some pride in the lack of fear, it took her a moment to realize her daughter was actually speaking against her. She's far too young to know of what she speaks, Robert. Is she? She's probably the cleverest person sitting at this table, he said, and she saw Marcella smile. Marcella, why don't you take Tommen and see if Sir Richard will take you to see the rest of the wolves? Robert said, and he glared at her, then daring her to speak. Really, father, thank you, Marcella said happily as she jumped from her seat and kissed his cheek, making him smile more broadly than she'd seen him in many a year. She waited until both Marcella and Tommen had left and looked to Joffrey, who was still glaring at his father. She took a swallow of the juice to wet her lips, sorry now she'd not brought wine with her, and then she decided to let her husband know the extent of her displeasure. You can't allow them to spend their time with those beasts. It's bad enough my children have been spending time with bastards. I'll not have them risk so. She said angrily. Risk so, risk so. What risk is there? The only risk those wolves have caused is to our fool of a son and our reputation. A reputation I'm struggling to rehabilitate because of the actions of a spoiled, petulant boy. That wolf attacked our son, she said, rising to her feet, and thank the gods he did so. Pulling a knife on a girl. The boy is not even man enough to use his fists. Well, we'll soon see that put right, Robert said, confusing her. Robert, our son is to foster in Dragonstone. Perhaps some time with Stannis can make a man out of him, something we both clearly failed to do. No, you can't. I'll not stand for it, she said. You'll stand, sit. You'll lie fucking down for it. If I say so. I'm the king and that is my fucking heir. He'll learn to be a man, or by the 7 he'll find himself with no damn crown to wear. Robert, please. No. He's fucked up one betrothal I wished for him and forced me to make another, so no, when we leave he'll be traveling to Dragonstone, and mark my words, both of you, try and go around me on this and I'll fucking send you both there, he said angrily. She felt her blood begin to boil. Looking to the table, she almost picked up the knife before she felt her mind clear. Another betrothal? What the hell did Robert mean by that? Who had he betrothed Joffrey to? Surely it wasn't the roses. Given how the girl had behaved and how she'd not sat with them, it couldn't be Marjorie, which then left her wondering, who? Who have you betrothed Joffrey to? She asked. Him. You think I can get anyone to take him now after what he did? Ned would have struck me had I suggested it, and even Mace Tyrell would have turned me down. Betroth him? Unless he grows up and proves himself better, he'll be lucky to find a wife among Walder Frey's brood. Then who? She asked. Myrcella. Myrcella is to be married to Brandon Stark. She couldn't believe it. He'd given his only daughter, her sweet girl, to a heathen Northman, a savage and a second son. She deserved so much better. So furious was she that she never saw them leave, never heard them as they went, and it was only once they had that she noticed. Getting up from her seat, she stormed down through the corridors, Sir Mandon walking behind in her wake. Reaching the room, she banged on the door, and as her aunt opened it, she drew her hand back. The slap she aimed never landed, Jenna proving far too quick for her, far too fast. Sir Mandon stepped forward but then moved back, the wolves walking towards him, forcing him to. Cersei, though, didn't even notice it. All she saw was her hand being held and then being pushed back as she looked at her aunt. What are you doing, you crazy fucking bitch? Jenna said loudly. This is all your fault. You brought my children to the joust. You had them sitting with bastards and beasts. She said angrily as she heard the footsteps. She looked around. Lord Stark and his youngest son and oldest daughter, Myrcella and Tommen, Lady Marjorie, and some other people she didn't know, along with those filthy beasts. Myrcella stood looking at her, as if she didn't know her, and Tommen was hiding behind his sister. Storming off down the corridor to her room, she slammed the door behind her. Picking up the wine bottle, she poured herself a glass and drank it quickly before sitting down and pouring another. They had embarrassed her once again, shamed her in front of people, and were plotting to take her children away from her. She'd not allow it. She'd find some way to stop it, she thought as she refilled her glass again. Highgarden 295 AC. Rob. After the joust, he had been allowed to miss the feast. Instead, he, Winifred, Lord Wyman, and Sir Wylis had a far quieter dinner, one he found he enjoyed even more than the feasts. He did love the pageantry, the dishes too, if he was honest, and the dancing afterward even more so. But it was not just the company that made this one that much more special. It was what he found out once he sat down and the meal began. Your father came to speak to us, Rob, Lord Wyman said, and he found himself looking to Winifred, her expression matching his own. He did, my lord? Aye. He came to speak of a match between you and my granddaughter. What was your answer, grandfather? Winifred asked eagerly. Impatient are you, daughter? Let your grandfather speak, Sir Wylis said with a chuckle. Sorry, father, she said. Would a match please you, granddaughter? Lord Wyman asked. And Rob looked to each of them. Lord Wyman's face was as unreadable as ever, making him nervous, while Winifred's smile made him less so. It would, grandfather. It would please me greatly. And you, Rob? Lord Wyman asked, catching him by surprise as he was looking at Winifred's smiling face. It would, my lord, greatly also, he said, and Lord Wyman just sat there, his two hands resting on his chin as he looked at them both, Rob's heart beating faster and faster as the moments went on. Grandfather? Winifred said, a little annoyed. What? Can't an old man have some fun? Lord Wyman said, laughing. Both I and your father are also greatly pleased by this match, Rob. We would be honored to have you as part of our family. He felt happier than he had ever known, something that Winifred, too, was obviously feeling, given the hug she gave her grandfather and then her father. You both behaved most honorably. See to it that it continues, and then, when you are of age, we'll be happy to see you wed, he heard Sir Wylis say. For the rest of the meal, when he wasn't looking at Winifred, he was speaking to her father or to her grandfather, talking on the future, and he felt himself looking forward to it immensely. They would be wed when he was 5 and 10, and while it felt so very far away, he knew it could have been so much worse. His own father had been 9 and 10, and so 3 years felt so much easier to endure than 7. He was allowed to escort Winifred to her room, and he held her hand as he did so, her father's guards walking behind him, making sure he didn't overstep his bounds. When he reached the door, he wanted nothing more than to kiss her and to hold her in his arms, but he knew he wouldn't be allowed, and so he took her hand in his instead. I shall see you on the morrow, my betrothed, he said, kissing her hand. On the morrow, my betrothed, she aided, smiling back as she walked into her room. As he was heading back to his room, he saw him in the distance and wondered where his brother was going at this hour. Even though he was with his guards, he felt this was perhaps the best chance he would get to pay him back for the prank he had pulled on him. He had thought long and hard about what to do and how to get him back, and found his options to be limited. Being in someone else's keep, he couldn't put dung in his mattress or do most of what he wished. He both needed to keep up appearances and couldn't risk doing something that could be construed as disrespectful. It had left him with no real idea of how to pay him back. Even what he planned would pale in comparison with John's own prank, but it would do for now, he felt. Following at a discreet distance, he was led through an area of the grounds he knew not, only ghost in the distance being enough to show him where to go. Through gaps in hedges and entrances that were hidden, he finally found himself at a secluded area where they stopped. Laying down on the grass, he crawled closer and saw John standing with 2 men, his guard, Sir Daron, and the other man, who was a complete surprise to him, as he wondered why John was meeting with Sir Barristan Selmy. I hope you don't feel I stole your moment, your grace, Sir Barristan said, and Rob looked on, trying to see where the king was. Not at all, sir. You managed to do what I could not. My betrothed was most pleased, he heard John say, and he gasped. I take it you'd like this back, Barristan said, handing his brother something. I thank you, sir. It's most precious to me. I had thought so. I had hoped to face you, Arthur. Like old times, Barristan, I don't think the realm is ready for my reappearance just yet, Sir Daron said with a chuckle. No, not yet, Arthur, but soon I hope, your grace, Barristan asked John Arthur. Your grace, betrothed. What was going on here? What was going on here? He felt lost, confused, as if everyone knew something he did not. Is brother a king? Go. How was John a king? What were they talking about? I hope so too. We can't hide the dragons for much longer. Rhaenys is almost ready to fly with me, and given her size, I wonder where we will be able to keep her, as soon she'll not fit the cave. John said, Dragons. What did he mean by dragons? This made no sense, he thought, as he crawled even closer. She is really that big? Barristan asked. Aye, Barristan. You should see her. I'd not have believed it if I hadn't seen it for myself, Sir Daeron said. Rhaegar knew, didn't he? Barristan said. My father knew, as did my mother, Sir Barristan, Jon said before he stopped and looked his way. Robb felt it then, the paw on his back, the white wolf's head close to his own. He smelt the breath, and within a moment Sir Daeron was standing beside Ghost, and he was looking up at his brother, or the boy he had thought was his brother. It seems we have much we must talk on, Ghost to me, Jon said. And Robb felt the wolf's weight lift off his back. Highgarden 295 AC. Jon. He had left the feast early, not because he wasn't enjoying himself as he had been, but he had arranged to meet with Sir Barristan alone. Well, as alone as he ever was these days, though he knew the man would wish to meet with Arthur too. He had owed him for what he did in the joust, and that it was he who had suggested it to him was something that endeared the man to him even more. That favor? I take it that it belongs to your betrothed? Barristan said as they walked from the tilt yard. It does, he said, looking back to the stands to see her looking at him. He smiled to reassure her, and because he found it was his usual response when she looked at him that way. Perhaps I could borrow it, Barristan asked, and he looked at her before figuring out why he'd asked for it. I thank you, sir, he said, smiling as he handed him the favor. So after spending time with Margaery, just seeing her with the garland on her head was enough to make him vow to crown her himself one day, and after taking Joy back to her room he had headed out to speak to the knight. Things had gone well until he felt the tingle at the back of his head, until he reached out, and then he saw what it was, or more precisely who, that ghost was warning him about. Sir Arthur, it seems we have a visitor. My cousin has come to see us, he said, nodding to where Ghost was. Arthur rushed, and he and Sir Barristan both walked a little more slowly to where Ghost had Robb pinned down. He looked down at his cousin and leaned in to Sir Barristan to whisper to him. Perhaps while I talk to my cousin, you and Arthur can speak, he said. I'd like that, but you'll be all right on your own? I will. Don't go far. But this is a conversation that was always coming, he said, his voice still barely able to be heard, thought the knight understood him well enough. After Ghost let Robb up, he motioned for him to follow, and they walked back into the garden, down further in, and he took a seat and waited for his cousin to begin. Jon, what's going on, Sir Barristan? He called you a king, I heard. Dragons, Jon. I had wished to tell you this, though I'd hoped it would be later. Not that I was hiding it from you. No, wait, that's not entirely true. But not because I didn't trust you. Hiding? Hiding what? Ned Stark isn't my father. I'm the true-born son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen, he said. And Robb looked at him like he was the Mad King. What, you can't, father? You're not my brother? I am your brother. I've always been your brother, and if you wish, I'll be your brother still. But Rhaegar, Aunt Lyanna, this makes no sense. He told him the tale, then almost shocking himself with how easily it rolled off his lips, with Sansa, with Margaery, even as it had been almost hard to tell them. Yet with Robb, it was far easier. He wasn't really certain why that was. Did he care less what his brother thought? He didn't think so and so. He wondered if it was just that he was now more sure of who he was, that it perhaps felt easier because of that. When he was finished, he waited for his brother to speak. Robb was pacing around looking at him, and then biting his tongue and pacing some more. The moments seemed to stretch on and on. The silence was almost deafening, and yet his brother said nothing until finally he turned to look at him. You are the rightful heir? I am. You're going for the throne? Robb said. I am. I don't, Jon. I don't understand this, father. What he told us, what everyone knows, is a lie, Robb. For your father, it was a way to protect me. You know what happened to my brother, to my sister, and their mother? He asked. They were killed, Robb said. They were butchered. Elia was raped. Robb, Aegon was a babe, and they threw him so hard against a wall that my sister was 3 name days old. Do you know what they did to her? He said, his anger rising. Jon. Half 100 times she was stabbed, Rob. Half 100. What would you do to the men who did that? To Arya, to Sansa? What if Bran had been killed? But the men, who were they? The men are dead. The people who profited by the deaths, the people who sat by and did nothing about them, are not. Do you know what the king called my brother and sister when they were presented to him? Dragon spawn? I didn't know that, Rob said softly. There are many things you don't. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but now you know I am the rightful heir, the rightful king, and I will take my family's throne back. What am I supposed to do, Jon? Bend my knee. Tell you I'm with you? Rob asked, confused. For now, nothing. I'm asking you for nothing. You are my brother, true. We're cousins, but you are my brother, so whatever that means to you, that's what I ask of you. Who else, Jon? Who else knows? No, that you don't get to know Rob. You knowing of me is a risk to me and that I can allow. I'll not risk anyone else. You think I'd tell? That I'd speak on this? Rob said angrily. I think you knowing puts my life at risk, and that's my decision to make. But I'm well used to my life being at risk. Twice people have tried to kill me. I lost a good man to one of the attacks, but I'm ready for them. Should they come for me, then I'm ready. You really think I'd speak up on this? I don't know, Rob. You're angry, confused. I don't know what you'll do with that. If you're asking me, am I willing to risk my life that you won't? Then I say yes, it's my life and it's mine to risk. My father? Rob asked. I just told you I'd not tell. Please, Jon, give me something. Can I speak to my father on this? Aye, thank you, Rob said as he began to walk away. You are my brother, Jon, now and always. Now and always, he said back as he watched Rob leave. He had wished to tell him more, to explain it all to him. But he wasn't ready for it, not for all of it, unlike with Sansa. There was still a distance between he and his brother. Should he know too much? He was risking far too many lives. So it was better this way until his brother spoke to his uncle anyway. When Barristan and Arthur came back, he spoke to them. And despite their protestations, he felt he was in the right with this. Rob wouldn't speak out, not yet, not until he spoke to his father, and so after bidding Barristan a good night, he walked to his uncle's room and told him what had happened. How much does he know? He knows who I am, and that I intend to go for the throne, that's it. His mother? His uncle asked. No, I'll speak to him. Tell him I'm supporting you, tell him my reasons why. Don't tell him of the others yet, uncle. Give him time to come to terms with it all. In a few moons we can speak to him again. Aye, how are you feeling? His uncle asked concernedly, like I should have pulled him aside and spoken to him sooner. Perhaps, or perhaps it's better. It was this way. Go sleep. You have a big day on the morrow. Aye. Good night, Uncle. Good night, Jon. Highgarden, 295 AC. Brienne. She was a little put out that she was not allowed to fight in the duels, but her age prohibited her from doing so. However, she was surprised to find the note under her door when she got ready to break her fast that morning. Opening it, she wondered why he wished to meet her, but thought no more of it as she went to eat. She put off the strange atmosphere of the people preparing for the duels. She knew that Robb and Cragen had not competed, and Laura seemed almost willing them to start. Jon, though, wasn't there. And as she looked around, she could see his sisters, Joy, and Marjorie seemed a little concerned by it. Something which she was more than happy to see soon faded when he came strolling in with Sir Walder later on, taking his seat. He immediately began to jape, and soon the rest of the morning's tenseness was gone. It was later, as they were on her way to the tents, that Sir Walder pulled her aside. You got my note? He asked. I did. Given the coin I won, I find myself in a much different position. I can now afford to kid out and manage a squire, something I was not able to beforehand. That is good, is it not? She said, not sure where he was going with this. It is. I wish you to squire for me, he said, and she looked at him in shock. Me? She asked. Aye, but I'm a girl. she said, and she was initially annoyed when he laughed before she realized it wasn't directed at her, but at what she had said. I can see that. I'm of the North, Brienne. I've known lady warriors, seen them. I wish you to be my squire. What say you? I would be honored, Sir Walder, she said, going down on one knee. Good. We shall start on the morrow. You already know most of the duties already. I will arm and armor you when I judge you ready, and in time you may earn a knighthood. But I'm a girl, she said, and he laughed again. I did hear you the first time, he said, and this time she laughed too. I thank you, Sir Walder, she said, and he nodded. As they turned to walk to the tents, she saw Lady Olenna and her 2 giant guards walking towards them. The closer they got, the more their size became apparent. My grandson is in the tent with John, Sir Walder. He is my lady, Sir Walder said. Left, right, you 2 wait outside. Olenna said as they reached the tent. She too waited outside, and standing with Walder and the 2 giant guards, she imagined to any who passed that all 4 of them must cut imposing figures. Left and right? Walder asked. I'm Eric, he's Eric, one of the twins said, and Brienne looked to the other. Walder, this is Brienne, Walder said, motioning to her. Aye, we saw you both in the melee. You did well, my lady, until you were distracted. Eric said, Thank you, though it was Sir Walder who took the day, she said, smiling. Sir Walder the Tall, Eric said, and Walder looked at him strangely. What makes you say that? Walder asked. I meant no offense, sir. It's just what some of the small folk have been calling you. Eric said, After Sir Duncan? Grape, Brienne asked, and Eric nodded. That could be said about any of us, Eric said with a chuckle, and she couldn't help but laugh. My father has a shield that once belonged to Sir Duncan, though how it came to be in Evenfall I do not know. Brienne said, A green shooting star above an elm tree at sunset? Eric asked.
Aye, that's the one,
Brienne said, and watched as the twins looked to each other. Just like the one Mother has, Eric said, before they could speak any more. The Lady Olenna walked outside, and so after saying their goodbyes to them, Eric, as she felt foolish thinking of them as left and right, both of the twins nodded and left them alone. She looked to Walder, who seemed to be lost in thought, and she felt something at the back of her mind. Turning to the knight, she asked him what he thought about the shield. Strange, is it not? We both possess a shield that once belonged to Sir Duncan. Sir Duncan traveled extensively. He and Prince Aegon visited many places throughout the realm. They even visited Winterfell and the North. While it may not seem it, the world is not that large, and should you get the chance to do so, then travel is a good way to see that prove true. Do you intend to travel, Sir Walder? I already am, Brienne. My path has brought me from the north to the west and now the south. Maybe I shall go east one day, he said. And she found herself thinking that over. It would be nice to travel, she thought. It was almost time for the duels, and when Jon, Loras, and Cregan walked from the tent, she moved with Sir Walder as they walked to check out the lists. Just like the tourney in King's Landing, this would end with a melee, though given the number of people here, it would be far larger. 3 rounds of duels and then a melee of over 32 people, and she once again felt annoyed she'd not be competing. As they walked to the yard, they were joined by other young squires and pages. Some were taking part, some just looking on in envy, and she found her own excitement rising. Highgarden, 295 AC, Olenna. She arranged the meeting with Littlefinger for before she broke her fast, not wishing him to infringe on too much of her day. Sitting in her soul as she thought on what she was going to say to him. After what he had done with her granddaughter, she had almost gone to Jon and demanded he allow them to deal with him now. Though that was her anger talking, and if Jon could hold his own in, then so could she. That he thought he could manipulate them with a made-up letter. That the prince was capable of writing wasn't even something she was certain of, but even was he? There was no way he'd written this. She even doubted the signature on the end of the page was the prince's, or had he actually signed it. then he had not known what it was he was putting his name to. Holding it in her hands, she smirked. John hadn't even bothered to read it, so little did he care about it, and that convinced her even more that he knew as she did that it was Littlefinger's hands that were all over the letter. My dearest Marjorie, I cannot begin to apologize enough for the events of this morning and for the harsh words that I spoke to you later on. I was so filled with worry and with concern for your safety that I fear my actions may have seemed to be something they were not. Seeing those wolves, I found myself overwhelmed with thoughts of what they could do to you, and because of this I acted most rashly. Later in the Grand Hall, I saw myself accused of things I do not remember doing, of things I don't remember saying. My father had refused to allow me to stand up for myself, and then when I heard what you said, how you had misinterpreted things, and so I let my anger cloud my judgment. In trying to protect you, my lady, it seems I have instead caused you great offense, and I hope you can and do accept this sincere apology. I look forward to the opportunity to explain this to you in person, though I understand if you feel you need some time before you'll allow my presence. Ever hopeful, Joffrey Baratheon, Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms. That Littlefinger would think that anyone could expect such a letter to be written by that boy was a testament to his stupidity. That he thought that her granddaughter not only would, but that she would also keep the said letter to herself, proved it even more. Placing the letter back in the drawer, she waited, and found to her relief that she didn't need to wait too long. My lady, I'm glad you've called for me, he said, his ever-present smirk already annoying her as he walked to her desk, left walking slowly behind him. Are you indeed? Certainly, my lady. Perhaps it's best if we speak in private. No, my lord, it is not. I find myself having no wish to speak to you in private, and barely a wish to speak to you at all, she said, raising her voice slightly. Forgive me, my lady, but have I offended you in some way? He asked, as if he cared that he had. Your very presence offends me. You think I'd not hear of that little stunt you pulled with my granddaughter. My lady, you have me at a loss, he said with a mock, confused look on his face. I doubt that. Those things you said to my granddaughter about the joust, you think I'd not hear of them? My lady, I was just offering my concern, especially with the youth of Lady Marjorie's friend. Friend? She asked, shaking her head. Jon Snow, my lady. You really are a fool. Baelish, you think I called you here to discuss a bastard. I'm speaking to you on mentioning my grandson. My lady? He said once again, acting confused. Don't give me that. You bringing up how dangerous a tourney was, knowing full well what happened to Willis, knowing full well it would hurt my granddaughter to have you do so. My lady, there has been a misunderstanding, he said, his voice rising a pitch. Left, she said, and her guard moved forward before reaching out his hand, which he then placed it on Littlefinger's shoulder. Well, let me be clear on this, Lord Baelish. I do not appreciate someone harming my family either in words or in deeds, had you done the latter. She paused as she nodded to Left, who began to squeeze the man's shoulder hard. My lady, please, he said, his pain clear. Remember this well, my lord. You may move in the corridors of power, but you are a minor lord from a minor house. How many men can you call upon, Lord Baelish? Do you think there is a man in your service who is of a match to one in mine? She said, nodding to Left, who took his hand from Littlefinger's shoulder. My lady, forgive me if I caused offense. It was not my intent, I swear it. Littlefinger said, reaching his own hand to his shoulder now. See to it that you do not again. As for the prince, for now, my answer is no. We do not wish to be joined to that boy. We will not bring our coin to bear, for now. For now? He asked. For now. Let us see if the boy grows up some, and then we may speak again. My lady, he said with a small bow as he rose and walked from the room. She nodded to Left, who walked out, and then she took a sip of the juice she had on her desk. It was far more blunt and to the point than she would normally go, but the intent would work. He'd think them upset over Willis and not John, think them potentially an ally, and especially think her as far less formidable than she was. A man like Littlefinger assumed those who resorted to violence to be less clever than he. He didn't understand that violence was necessary too. Highgarden 295 AC. The Squire's duels. Cregan. He was nervous as he stepped out. Up to now, the biggest crowd of people he'd ever been in front of was at Casterly Rock when he and John, Loras, or Brienne would spar. But compared to this, that was like a quiet day. He could feel the shaking in his hands and hoped he'd not do something embarrassing like drop the tourney sword or anything like that. His opponent was a lad from the Vale, a young man squire to Sir Marwyn Belmore called David, and as Cregan looked to him, he could see the boy was as nervous as he. They stood in the middle of the yard, awaited the signal, and as soon as it came, they began. Very quickly he felt his nerves dissipate, swinging the sword, forcing his concentration to be on that instead of the crowd around him, just like his uncle had said it would. He won the first point after a series of strikes that David parried, changing up his style. He confused the boy, and when he went to parry what he thought would be an orthodox strike, Cregan hit him with an unorthodox one, catching him by surprise. His second point came with a thrust, but at the cost of a point against him as he was countered before he moved back, and his third and fourth were far more simple as the boy seemed to tire. "The day is yours," David said as the boy caught him across the side while Cregan hit his fifth strike against the boy's shoulder. "You fought well," Cregan said, and the boy smiled as the herald announced his win, and they both walked to the back together. No sooner had they walked through when he saw the boy frown as a group of older lads walked over towards them. There were 4 of them, and it was obvious the boys knew David and he, them, given how he reacted to them, before they could come close. Though John and Loras arrived, and he saw the oldest of the boys, a blonde-haired lad with blue eyes, glare at them before walking away. "You did well, Cregan," Loras said, making him smile. "I got lucky. On another day it could have been David's," he said, and the lad smiled at them and bid them goodbye. "We now get to see Loras's favorite activity in the whole world," John said, confusing him for a second. "Beating up Florence." "Aye, now if you'll both excuse I shan't be long," Loras said with a laugh as he walked out to the yard. Cregan looked at the boy he was facing. He had Loras beat on size and most probably strength, and to him it looked as if his friend may face some problems. John, though, seemed unconcerned, as if he knew the match was a foregone concussion, and it was he who was proved right. Loras not only demolished the Florent, who John told him was part of Stannis's party, but he threw in some blows that seemed to be painful also. "Why doesn't he like Florence?" he asked as he saw Robb arrive. "They think they should be running the Reach, and aren't afraid to shout it out loud to any who will listen. They also like to disparage Loras and his family at every opportunity. So he takes it out on them where he can. That lad is lucky this isn't a joust," John said, and he nodded. "Robb, who are you facing?" he asked when his cousin reached them. "A Brack squire," Robb said. "Watch out for your blind side, and keep your sword firm in your hand," John said, and Robb nodded. "Who'd you get?" Robb asked. "Sir Daemon Squire," John said, and as Loras came back, they stood and watched 2 more lads head out before John began to jape at their friend's expense. "All hail the conquering hero." "Fuck off," Loras said, smirking. "That last one must have hurt him," Cregan said. "Good," Loras said. When Robb went out, they wished him good luck, and he found himself eager to watch his cousin fight. They had talked briefly about each other, and Robb seemed to believe it when he told him that he had no wish for Winterfell, but he knew that it would always be there at the back of his mind. So he had resolved to show him by his actions that he was no threat to him or his family. John's advice was sound, and Robb won, though it was closer than it should have been at 5 points to 3, and he assumed some of that was down to nerves. When John went out, he saw the boy he faced was using a spear, and while he had faced one himself and knew what you were supposed to do, he always had trouble with them. "Watch this," Loras said as he and Robb looked on. John stood with his thin blade and with a dagger in his hand. The dagger was also thin, but much longer than a normal knife and a close match to the one he carried always. As the boy thrust with his spear, John blocked it with the sword. He then followed through, pinning it to the ground, and spun, so she was now holding the knife to the boy's throat. They heard him yield all the way back here, and he smiled when John walked back towards them. "He's gotten better," Rob said. "Aye. You remember that with Mira," Laura said, and Rob nodded. The three of them walked back to the tents as John stayed to watch more fights and to also see Joy's cousins fight. Once there, they grabbed some water as they waited for the second round, and he found himself hoping all four would make it to the melee, or if not, that he'd at least get to face one of them in the duels themselves. Their spars were always competitive. But he knew this was different, and he could feel his excitement rise at the thoughts of competing against them properly. Rob, he was out of sorts. He knew it, and it had almost cost him in his first fight. The revelations of the night before still weighed heavily on his mind, and his morning's conversation with his father hadn't helped. He knew now that not only was John going for the throne, but that his father would back him, given his connection with the West. He assumed Lord Jaime would too. John would be a good king and given both the one on the throne, though really apart from drinking and behaving terribly with women, he wasn't sure he thought Robert a bad man. He could see, however, why John did, and the idea of what he had said disgusted him, to Rob, though it seemed the realm was at peace, and so why should they fight a war to unseat the king? His son, on the other hand, well, yes, him they couldn't allow, sit the throne, and so he had asked his father why. "You know the pool by the heart tree in Winterfell's Godswood," his father said. "Aye, on the surface, it looks calm and placid, does it not?" "It does. Yet underneath it, life is going on. Life that we don't see. That is the realm, Rob. Winterfell is the pool, and all seems well, but beneath it, the people suffer." "I don't understand, father. You know the tourney John won in King's Landing? Did you hear what he did with the prize money?" "No. 5,000 gold dragons he won, and he and Lady Marjorie used it, and coin that her family added to it, to feed the hungry, to set up things so people who were going without now had food in their bellies. What has that got to do with him going for the throne? As Lord, is it not my responsibility to ensure our people are fed?" "It is," Rob said. "Then, was it not the king's also? I loved Robert. He was my brother by choice, but he was never meant to sit the throne. What you see here is how he is. He doesn't rule, Rob. He enjoys being a king, and that's something very different." As he stepped out to face his second opponent, he tried not to think on it. His father had told him that Sansa knew, and he felt put out by that. Though he understood that Jon's relationship with his sister was stronger than their own, he had spoken to her only briefly, and what she had said had probably put it even more clearly into perspective, even if he still wasn't fully behind his brother yet. "You know of Jon?" "Aye. And what do you think?" he asked her. "When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives," Sansa said, smiling. He stood facing the young lad from the Stormlands with his sword ready, and he thought more on it. Jon was pack. That much was clear, and so he would support him. He knew that deep down, and it was becoming clearer to him in his mind also. His doubts he put down to feeling upset that he had learned how he had, and that Jon hadn't come to tell him, though he was starting to understand why that was. "You ready, boy?" the larger lad said, and he nodded as they began. The other boy was fast, and technically he was almost, if not more sound than he. Rob found his strikes being countered, found himself being forced back, and when he lost the first point, they got annoyed with himself. "Lost in your dreams, boy. Lost in your dreams is when the fight happens. Lost in your dreams is when you fall. Do you want to be a dead boy?" Rob smirked as he moved forward. "There is only one God," he thought, "and the only thing we say to him is not today." He moved swiftly, his strikes coming in at angles that caught the other lad unawares. The first strike catching his shoulder, the second his arm as he turned, the third the top of his leg. As he backed away from a retaliatory strike, he came in again, and with a thrust and then a side swipe, it was done. He walked back to the others and saw the smile on his brother's face, on Kragan's, and he couldn't keep his own away. "You did well," Kragan said simply, as was his style. "Well, that was amazing. You moved so fast, I think we may have some trouble with this one, Jon," Loras said and slapped him in congratulations on the shoulder. "Aye, a Braavosi swordsman in our very midst," Jon said, smiling. As Kragan and Loras readied themselves, he walked over to his brother and leaned in to whisper in his ear, "My blade is yours, my king, now and always, Loras." While he had enjoyed beating the Florent and also the lad from the Riverlands, it was this opponent he'd enjoy most of all. Lancel was an enigma to him. To Jon, too, he knew. They had done their best to befriend him, and at times it had seemed as if it worked. And then almost every single time he went away with his father or came back from anywhere, it was as if they needed to start from scratch yet again. Why? He didn't know. It had gotten tiring after the first few times, and so he had stopped even trying. Jon still did, but he felt his friend was wasting his time. Unlike Martin and Willem or Walder and Tion, the older Lannister just seemed to have something against them. What it was, he wasn't sure. He had thought at first it was Jon, but the more he thought about it, the more it was clear that it wasn't, or at least it wasn't just that. "Ready to be put in your place, Flower?" Lancel said arrogantly. "Ready to hear a cat meow, Lancel," he said, smirking back. He enjoyed seeing the smirk leave Lancel's face and was ready for the angry strike that Lancel aimed at him. Loras had learned from Jon and Jaime not to show off, and he normally wouldn't, but facing Lancel, he couldn't resist it. He began to spin his blade and began to be ever more over-elaborate in his movements. The first hit he got came with almost a dance towards the other boy. The second came after he nonchalantly parried some of Lancel's blows, almost feigning boredom until he caught him on the shoulder. He was thinking of what he'd do for the next when the strike to his side winded him. And even though he couldn't see it, he knew that both Jaime and Jon were looking angrily at him. So he soon took it far more seriously. The next strike he had to work for, as Lancel was both more ready and taking confidence from his own hit. He did catch him on the thigh, though, and as he moved back, he caught Lancel once again on the shoulder he'd hit earlier, though he was caught on the elbow with a counter and felt the shock of the blow run down his arm. The last strike was pure luck. Lancel capitalized on his arm not being fully recovered, and amongst his parries of the boy's blows, he caught him with a riposte. "It seems the day is mine," he said, and Lancel just mumbled as he walked to the back. When he himself reached it, he was congratulated by Robb and Cregan enthusiastically, though by Jon less so, and he nodded knowing the reason, even if it was not only that which had his friend so annoyed. Tion, Martin, and Willem had competed in the duels, and while Martin had beaten his two opponents, both Willem and Tion had fallen to theirs. While alone, this wouldn't have been enough to raise Jon's ire. And while he'd given them all advice for each of their matches, it was the boy who'd beaten Tion that Jon was waiting for. Luck can be fortuitous or it can be terrible. For Harold Harding, he felt it to be the latter. Whether he knew of Jon's connection to Tion or he was just being his usual self, Loras didn't know. But he had hurt the boy. Not badly, but enough to have Jon almost rushing out to the field. And then he'd had the the terrible luck of being drawn against Jon in the final round. As he saw his friend pace, he could see that Harold would be in for a painful lesson of his own very soon. Jon didn't even bother to speak to any of them other than Martin, and the smile on the younger boy's face should have been warning enough. "Jon, go easy," he whispered, and Jon just smiled as he walked out with Harold, following just a few moments later. Jon. Anger was not a good thing to bring to bear, and he knew that. But seeing Tion hurt, seeing the tears in his eyes, and knowing he'd have to go and speak to Jenna later, Jon was furious. That it was Harding. That it was no doubt the fool's attempt at retribution towards him made the guilt feel even worse for him. So as he stood there facing the boy, he knew he was going to hurt him. He closed his eyes and reached out for Ghost, soon finding the wolf in the crowd resting beside his siblings while looking out on the field. He let the fire inside cool, felt the flames withdraw, and when he opened his eyes again, the fury he felt now was very much different. It was cold, it was calculating. and it would prove to be very painful for Harold Harding. He allowed the boy to move forward, and he gave him the first few strikes. He parried them weakly and drew him in even closer, and then he pounced. The first blow took him hard in the shoulder, exactly where he had hit Tian. The second was to his left arm, allowing for the third and fourth to hit the same shoulder again. The last was on the wrist, and whether he had broken it or not he didn't know, but the cry of pain from Harold seemed to suggest he had done so. As his sword fell to the ground as he held his injured wrist and looked up at him, John moved in close enough so he could hear his whisper, and so it would look to all as if he was worried about the boy. "Do you ever even think of harming anyone I care for, even if only for the briefest moment, and this will be the least pain you'll ever know, you understand?" he said, and Harold just looked at him silently. "I said, do you understand?" "Aye." "Good, now smile for the crowd, Harold," he said as he turned and picked up the boy's sword, and they walked to the back. He could see the shocked looks on Rob's and Cregan's face, the almost resigned look on Loris's, and yet it was the smile on Martin's that he concentrated on. Leaning in close to the boy, who was to face his own final opponent in a few moments, he whispered in his ear, "Remember what I told you? Aye. Don't stop moving, in and out as fast as I can," Martin said. "Aye, good fortune, Martin. I thank you, John." The boy, in the end, didn't need it. Martin was the best swordsman amongst Joy's cousins. Willem, he felt, would favor the lance, and Walter was still growing awkwardly, which made his hand and eye coordination a little off at times. Tian was good, but prone to slacking. Martin, however, took to his lessons well and would be very good in the years to come. He won 5-2, and when he came back, he seemed overly excited about the melee that was coming up after lunch, John making him promise to stay close to him during it. While the others ate, he sat at the back of the tent with his eyes closed. He was warged into a small mouse, and he scurried through the stands, eager to pick up any talk he could. In the end, he could pick up none, and so he opened his eyes and readied for the melee. They had agreed to try and stay close, not to work as a team as such, but more to ensure no one got hurt. If it came to it, they'd face each other, and he wouldn't be surprised if one or other challenged him or the others also. He grabbed some water, drank it down, and they got ready for the melee. The squire's melee Sansa. She looked out worriedly as the boys entered the arena. There were so many, and she'd seen in the other melee a few days ago just how dangerous they could be. In front of her, Arya, Lyanna, and Joy chattered on excitedly, all three girls seeming to get along well, with Joy and Arya competing to see who could be Jon's biggest cheerleader. A role that Sansa knew neither of them could truly win, as she looked up to see Marjorie sitting with her family. She had watched as Jon hurt the boy from the Vale, the blonde-haired lad who had hurt Tian. Hearing Joy's laughs when he did so was a little disturbing, but then it was her cousin that he'd hurt. For Sansa. Though it had been a mixture of relief that Jon himself hadn't been hurt, and worry as she'd not seen him so angry before. As the herald stood up, though she found herself praying that those she knew and cared about would be unharmed. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, I give you the squire's melee," the herald said loudly. She looked on and soon found it hard to tell who was who. There were far too many out there, and she couldn't pick anyone out. A lad she had thought to be Rob turned out to be someone else. Leaning forward, she asked Arya and Joy where Jon was, sure that if she couldn't find him, they would. "He's over there with Martin," Joy said, pointing to the edge of the field. She saw her brother then, Martin beside him as they faced off against two boys, the swords of the others almost seeming to be moving slowly compared to the blur of Jon's. When she saw him move in and trip the boy, she, like the three girls in front of her, cheered loudly. She then saw him point his sword to the boy's neck, and when he yielded, Jon turned to watch Martin fight. "Martin is good," Joy said excitedly. "He's your cousin, right?" Arya asked. "He is. Can you see what Jon is doing?" Joy said, smiling. Sansa didn't need to hear the answer, as she could see it clearly. While Jon wasn't interfering in Martin's fight, he was watching over him, and when Martin made the other boy yield, she watched as he and Jon moved out into the crowd. Unable once again to make out who was who and embarrassed to ask Arya and Joy once again, even she could see clearly that they were far more sure of it than her. Sansa instead closed her eyes and reached out to Fang. As she did so, something strange happened. She felt the presence of something else, a thread asking her to pull on it. She couldn't resist, and so she followed it and found another door. This one was closed, but as she got closer, it opened, and soon she felt herself flying. The bird was flying over the arena, and she felt that it was small and swift, looking down on the duels. She flew a little closer and was able to pinpoint everything. She could see everyone and clearly recognized them all. She opened her eyes and smiled as she looked up to see the bird flying there. It was small and brown, and so she closed her eyes and went looking for the door once again, finding it even easier this time. It was incredible to her. She had thought only Fang was to be hers, that she could warg into her wolf, and that would be it. Now it seemed she wasn't just a wolf. She was also a little bird too. Jon. As the field thinned, he found his eyes everywhere and nowhere. He was both beating squires and watching out for those he cared about, and he felt something was going to give. As he heard Martin yield, he almost got hit hard in the head. So concentrated was he on making sure Martin was unhurt that he'd forgotten about ensuring he was too. He moved fast then, using his sword, his dagger, and finally his legs as he swept the boy's feet from under him. Yield? Aye, the boy said, and he moved on. There was less than half the field now, and he was surprised to see that Cregan was the only one of the four who remained. Loras and Robb he had no idea about. Were they hurt? Who had beaten them? He moved towards Cregan and saw him faced with two boys from the Vale. One he knew was Michael Redford, while the other he knew not. By the time he got to Cregan, he too had been beaten, and it was now down to less than 10. Both boys from the Vale looked to him and then moved away, and he soon found himself faced with two other boys. They took him together, both of them moving in, and as he parried one strike, the other boy would aim his own. It took him a little time to move into position. When he did, he caught the first boy's blade, and then as it deflected, he pushed him into the other boy. Yield, he said, kneeling down, his sword at the neck of the boy who was furthest from him, and his dagger at the other boy's chest. Aye, they said one after another. He looked around to see it was down to 7 now. 2 were facing off while the other 4 seemed to be in a discussion, and he saw them look to him. He didn't wait for them to make their intentions clear. Quickly rising to his feet, he ran as fast as he ever had. He hit the first boy with his shoulders from behind, knocking him some feet away. The second he caught with the flat of the blade hard at the back of the knee, watching as he crumbled. Looking to the other 2, he saw it was Michael and the other boy from the Vale. As they moved towards him, he took his dagger and threw it, catching the other lad square on the forehead. Michael looked to him in shock as the other boy fell to the ground, and he quickly found himself face to face with Jon's sword. Without giving him a moment, he moved the strike, catching him as he brought his blade up. Jon, though, had put all his strength into it, and as he watched Michael's sword fall, he raised his own to the boy's neck. Yield. Aye, Michael said, and he looked to see the 2 boys he'd caught earlier rising to their feet. Once again he ran, and as he got close and saw the swords being lifted, he slid, the movement catching the closest boy by surprise. His sword raised, he once again caught the boy on the knee, this time to the front, and once again he was down. Quickly rising to his feet, he parried the blow that came, and then spun, using the hilt of the sword to bash against the boy's chest. Yield, he said to the winded boy. Aye. The other boy was on the ground holding his knee, and so he just walked over, raised his sword, and held it to his chest. He didn't even need to ask. I yield. The fight was over between the 2 who'd taken no part, and as Jon walked over to face the victor, the boy he'd caught with his dagger staggered to his feet. Jon, still looking at the other boy, simply raised his sword and asked, and the still drowsy boy yielded, and then walked to the back unsteadily. As he looked at the last lad, he thought there was something familiar about him. You're Jon Snow, the lad said. Aye. And you? Demeric Bolton, Ned. While he had thought this to be a waste of time, he found he had enjoyed the duels, even with Robert's incessant cheering beside him. God's the way he cheered from Jon made him think he thought the boy his own son, rather than thinking him to be his. Not that his nephew didn't deserve the praise. Jaime Lannister had said Jon was an incredible swordsman, and he'd seen it some for himself in Winterfell. Here, though he was in his element, he had watched as Jon protected the young blonde lad, as he had stood close by and paid him all his attention, and he had been annoyed at it. Though not as much as Jaime was, he'd noticed when he looked to the man. It wasn't that he was protecting the lad. That was admirable. Nor was it that he wasn't protecting his friends, as had been doing well by themselves. It was that he was distracted, that he, in spending his time watching the young lad, wasn't watching the field. Something which became even clearer when the young lad yielded, and Jon seemed almost shocked to see that only Cregan remained out there. Had he not been sitting with Robert, he may not have noticed it. Even with a drink in his hand, his friend's instincts for fighting were still better than his. "They're targeting them," Robert had said beside him. "Who?" "Those lads. They're targeting Jon's friend's watch." So watch he did, and he saw it clearly. Then, Robb was first. He had just beaten an opponent when the two boys moved to him. His son was good, but he was outmatched and soon yielded. They did the same to Loras, though it took only one. As soon as Loras had won his fight and turned, the boy's sword was upon him, and he was taken so by surprise that he'd yielded. "They're worried about your boy Ned. They don't want to face him without the numbers, just like King's Landing." "What?" "They tried it in King's Landing too, but your boy put them to the sword, Ned. It was fucking glorious," Robert said, laughing as he drank his ale. What he saw next could well be described as glorious. The crowd certainly thought so. And for Ned, he'd only ever seen the like of it from one man before. Jon, though, fought differently than Arthur. He used a little of everything: speed and technique, power, and some of the northern melee tactics also. He was like a raging inferno, and each boy he took down came with a commentary from the king. "Did you see that, Ned? By the gods, where did he learn to fight like that? He never saw that coming. How many is that now, Ned?" On and on. Robert droned on about how great Jon was, and while he found himself awed by the performance, he worried about the anger and rage Jon was showing. It wasn't full-on screaming and shouting rage, but it was rage all the same, and he hoped that what he saw was controlled. "Just the two of them left, isn't that a Bolton?" Robert said. "Aye, that's Roos's lad, Domeric." "This should be good then. The boy's got no chance, Ned, isn't that right, Sir Barristan?" Ned turned to look at the knight, and had he not known that he had declared for Jon, he'd have known now from looking at him. He had seen people before with that look of devotion on their faces. He'd fought against them, men who served a good prince, men who had hoped to serve a good king. "Aye, your grace. I've not seen a swordsman like Jon in many a year." "Nor I. What say you, Ned?" "I've not seen Domeric fight, but I've not seen anyone fight like Jon either," he said, and almost choked. Such was the power of the backslap that Robert gave him, though it was his words which caused it mostly. "A chip of the old block, Ned. His father's son, that one," Robert said. "Aye," he said, smiling. He truly was. The two boys lined up, and he was pleased to see Jon smile, and the one on the other boy's face. The fight was far from even, though Domeric got a hit in, that was the extent of things for him. Jon fought calmly and precisely, dismantling the boy with speed and technique and winning 5-1. "See? I told you. Didn't I tell you?" Robert said, laughing loudly. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, I give you the winner of the squire's melee, Jon Snow." Ned listened to the cheers and the plaudits from the crowd and looked to Jon, surprised to see his smile so forced. While he, along with the rest of the crowd, had cheered Jon's win, he, unlike most, hadn't been surprised when he didn't turn up for the feast. He had heard later that Jon had met Joy in her room for their story, and that he had spoken briefly to Marjorie, but Jaime knew what it was that was on his king's mind. Getting up early the next morning, he kissed his wife, checked on Joanna, and made his way to the sparring yard. He found him with Arthur and Ghost, Jon turning and twisting as he brought his sword to various parts of the training dummy. Walking over, he grabbed a tourney sword and took his position, waiting for Jon to notice him. When he did, Jaime tapped the ground 3 times and they began, Jon putting even more effort and power into each swing. Had he not already expected Jon's upset, then he'd have thought it unusual, but even Arthur was getting more and more used to Jon's routines. "My cousins were singing your praises last night," Jamie said. They shouldn't, John replied. No, they should. What you did to Harding, Tion enjoyed it immensely. Oh, John said. And it was even more clear now that Jamie had been right. Have you your gift for Marjorie? He asked, and John's swing lost some of its power. I don't know when to give it to her, though, before or after. Not during? People would talk, John said as his movements began to quicken. Let them talk. Your sister is fostering with her John, Loris, and your friendship is known. Gifting her on her name day would not be thought of how you think, Jamie said and saw John nod. No! He had noticed it yesterday, and it was even more clear this morning. But John was getting even faster as he looked up at the expression on his face, though Jamie was taken aback. The blow that John caught him with next surprised them both, so much so that John actually stopped to look at him, and Jamie found he was once again face to face with a ghost. My lord, walk with me, John, he said, trying to shake the image of the prince from his head. They walked through the gardens, Ghost running off ahead of them to check. No one was in their way, he suspected. When they reached the secluded area, he sat down, John deciding to stand, and for a few moments there was silence before, eventually, John began to speak. I messed up, John said resignedly. You did. I was so concentrated on Martin, especially given what had happened with Tion. I was so focused on him that I couldn't protect them. Protect who? He asked, though he knew full well. Loris, Rob, Cregan. I left them alone. I wasn't there for them, John said with a sigh as he looked to the ground. You're not supposed to be, he said. And John's head snapped back up to look at him. I am, of course, I am. They're my friends, who are old enough to protect themselves. Arthur, who do you protect in a fight? The king, Arthur said simply. Even at the risk to everyone else? John asked, and Jamie was surprised as he knew that John wasn't that naive. Your life is the most important, Arthur said. It's not, Loris. Rob, Cregan, if that was a real fight, I'd have lost them. John said, if that was a real fight, you'd be dead, Arthur said, and Jamie looked at him. You should have concentrated on your own safety first and foremost, Jamie said, and he shook his head when John went to speak. No. You need to learn this and learn it now, of course. You protect your friends. If you are able, you protect them. But John, you can't do so at the cost of yourself, not even in a mock fight like a melee. They are my friends, my blood, John said angrily. They are old enough to fight and compete. Do you think they blame you for their losses? They should, John said, looking to the ground again. No, you deserve blame for what you did, but not because they lost. You deserve blame because you almost did so too, Jamie said. I don't understand, John said, looking to him. Arthur and I were brothers, he said, and then quickly added when Arthur looked at him, our brothers. In a fight, I would try to protect my brother, but not at the expense of the king, nor even my own life, Arthur said. Was it that way at the Tower of Joy? John asked. I saw Gerald fall and then saw Oswald fall. I couldn't reach them. I needed to fight the men in front of me because there was something far more important that I needed to be alive to protect, Arthur said softly. Me, John said resignedly. You, Arthur said, a smile on his face. When I was sitting in the throne room, I had thought I'd done what was needed. I didn't think, had I then? It's not your fault, John said, reaching out and putting his hand on his shoulder. Just as your friend's falling is not yours, John. It's in me, Jamie Arthur. I can feel it. I need to do it. I don't know how to stop it, but I can't lose anyone else. I can't, John said, shaking his head. He grabbed him then and held him tightly, John not sobbing, but he could feel the need coming off him, feel his breathing at first quickly, and then as it calmed down. No matter how many times he tried to teach him this lesson, it hadn't taken, and he wondered if he needed a different tack. For now, though he just gave the boy the comfort he could, knowing that this, as much as anything, was what John needed. It was John who moved from him, and he was pleased to see the smile appear on his face. As he told him then that the boy he'd faced last was a Bolton squired in the Vale, Jamie saw a gleam in John's eye. "What?" he asked, wondering what plan he had. "It gives us an in to the Vale," John said, "just like Beric does in the Stormlands." "Beric?" he asked, confused for a moment. "Aye. Lord Beric is to marry Arthur's sister. His squire is Arthur's nephew. He's a good man, and I've spoken to him more than once." "Dondarrion?" "Aye. What are you planning?" he asked with a chuckle. "With Beric. I've simply invited him to the Rock. We could perhaps give him some trade and feel him out. I saw how he looked at Joffrey, and I doubt he wishes to serve such a king. And with the Bolton, that's more difficult, but I think we could bring him on board. Even if it doesn't do anything for us in the Vale, the Boltons are one of my uncle's strongest bannermen. Roose is not a pleasant man. His heir may be better." "Speak to Richard about them both before you make any plans, John. Let him take a look into them. What do you plan to do about the Blackfish?" "I don't know. With Bran squired to him and now with Bran and Myrcella to be wed, I think we need to bring him in. But you know his house words?" John asked. "Family, duty, honor," he replied. "Aye, and family comes first," he said, and Jamie nodded. "John, about the melee," Jamie said. "I understand you're not the first person, or even the second," John said, looking to Arthur. "Who told me I was a fool?" He chuckled. "As your hand, it's my duty to do so," he said with a small laugh himself. "Thank you. Thank you," John said, looking to him, and Jamie knew he meant for more than the talk. "Come, let's break our fast. That wolf of yours is looking at me as if I was a piece of bacon, or God's forbid a sausage," he said with a laugh. He would speak to Oberyn and get him to reinforce the point also. If they had to do it every day he fought, then they would, as he needed to know. The only thing he should take from a fight was his life, even if it cost others theirs. Highgarden, 295 AC, Jojen. He'd not had much of a chance to spend time with John since he'd arrived here, Loras he had, and he and Mira had both met with Kragan, his sister. Despite there being a tourney on, and her own interest in fighting, had spent more time with Sansa and the other girls, and had met both Marjorie and Joy. But John seemed to have no time, and he felt a little upset that he'd not gotten to speak to him. Even now, as he walked with him, he was a bit annoyed knowing that the reason he'd come to him wasn't to spend time with him, or to ask how he was, but because he wished his help. As they walked through the gardens with Walder and Jorce behind him, Jojen tried to put these feelings to one side, but found it hard to do so. "I know," John said, and Jojen turned to look at him. "What? That I've not spent time with you, with Mira, that I've not been the best friend," John said sadly. "John, no, I know. I wish I could say it'll be different or that I'm sorry, which I am. It's just, God's judging the time. I've no time. I'm not even there yet, and I've no time." "It's all right." "No, it isn't. I've been no good to anyone while I've been here. You know I came here hoping to spend time with Marjorie, and I've spent less time with her than I did when she came to the Rock. It's her name day. She's who we came here for, and I've spent less time with her than I did when she came to mine." "I understand. I had hoped that Liara would be here," he said and blushed. "You've kept in touch," John said as they walked further into the gardens. I had hoped the great John would have brought her with him, but he didn't. "Looks like we both didn't get what we wished for from this trip," John said, and he couldn't help but chuckle. "You should come to Greywater Watch," he said a moment later. "I'd like that. We should arrange that, Jojen." "I'm sorry. Can you tell Mira from me that I'm sorry?" Aye. The area he'd walked him to was empty but quite open, and Jojen saw Lord Stark, Sansa, Robb, Arya, and Bran sitting there along with the wolves. He was surprised to see Lady Janelle was there also, but thought nothing of it. As they walked closer, he saw Sansa was playing with a small brown bird, and he looked to see John was as surprised as he. "It seems someone started without us," John said, and Sansa opened her eyes as the bird flew away. It seems someone never told me I could fly too, Sansa said, and John chuckled. Lord Stark, Jojen will help when you head back. He and Mira and Lord Reed will join you, and he'll give you the instructions that I can't. Listen to him and do as he says. He knows more of this than any of you, John said, looking to Arya and Bran and then to him. Are you going to teach us to be a wart? Bran asked. It's a warg, stupid, Arya said, laughing. That's what I said, a warg, Bran said, emphasizing the last word. I'm going to try, and then Jojen will teach you how to manage it better. Jojen sat down with Arya and Bran while John sat down with his uncle, brother, and sister. As he looked at the two, he thought on to what John said, to the doors, and how he had just opened them. Close your eyes. Spose your eyes, he said, and they both did so. Now I want you to think of your wolves. Think of what they look like, of what they might be looking at. He looked on as both tried and failed to do so. Arya opening one eye to look to see where Nymeria was before closing it again, and then saying what she'd seen with her open eye. You can't look at it, Arya. You need to think it, to imagine it. Can you see it yet? No, she said, clearly frustrated. Whoop, Bran. I can see it. Summer is rolling in the grass, Bran said, and Jojen turned to see the wolf was doing just that. Good, now look closer. Can you see a door? It's open. I'm walking inside, Bran said. The boy's eyes shot open a moment later, and he looked almost scared as he looked at Jojen, backing up slightly in the grass. Bran, are you all right? Janelle said, moving to him. Yeah. I saw it. I saw the grass through Summer's eyes, he said almost fearfully. That's good, Bran. There's nothing to be scared about, Janelle said, and Jojen watched as Bran looked to the woman and then to him. There isn't? He asked doubtfully. No, it's not. It's a good thing. Now let's try again, Jojen said. It was soon clear that the boy was a natural, something that surprisingly Arya was not. After a few moments where he couldn't get Arya to concentrate, he gave up. Rising to his feet, he walked over to Jon and whispered in his ear. Jon, it seemed, was having more luck. Then Robb, had Grey Wind licking his hand while Lord Stark sat with a smile on his face. Sansa. He could only guess was flying, and he hoped Jon spoke to her about that. You could get lost in the clouds very easily while you were warged in a bird. As Jon walked over to speak to Bran and Arya, he waited until the others opened their eyes and spent the next couple of hours showing them how to better use their connection. He then explained how the more they warged, the easier it became, and told them he'd speak to them more when they traveled. Looking over to Jon and then to Arya, who was clearly in her wolf at that point, he wondered if it was Jon's own magic, or whether he was just more in tune with warging than he. Whatever the reason, it was clear he'd helped Arya when he could not. But maybe that was because he understood his sister better. Maybe he knew how to get through to her more so than Jojen did. By the time they'd headed back to the keep, he was hungry and had greatly enjoyed spending the day with the Starks and his friend. He hoped Mira's day was as good also, and that Jon would soon take him up on his offer to come to the Neck. Highgarden, 295 AC, Wyman. While he loved feasts, even he was getting tired of them. The one the day the tourney ended, the one the next night, and the next, and the soon-to-be the end feast, and then finally the name day one for Lady Marjorie. Though at least that one and the end feast would be different. As it was, he woke up and felt barely able to move. True, he'd overindulged the night before, and he shook his head as he really should know better. He dressed and went to break his fast, for once not eating. And as he was sitting down, he saw Jon walk in and surprisingly coming to his table rather than the Lannisters' one. After asking if he could be seated and receiving a nod from him, Jon took a seat next to Willa, though, a little away from Winifred, and he couldn't help but chuckle at boys and their sense of honor. What brings you to my table, Jon? Not that we don't welcome the visit. I fear I've been most neglectful, my lord, all the hospitality you've shown me, and yet I've not supped with you once during the tourney. It's understandable, Jon. You did have a melee to win after all, he said with a laugh which both Wylis and Jon returned. Well, I think it's been most remiss of you, Jon. A girl may think you dislike her or have forgotten that we're friends, Willa said, smirking. Perish the thought, my lady, Jon said, and he saw his granddaughter smile more fully. I never forget my friends, which is yet another reason for my coming to your table, my lord. It is. Aye, I was wondering, do you have plans for lunch? John asked, and he had to resist the urge to smirk himself as John's expression made it clear this wasn't to be an ordinary lunch. I'm sure my plans could be changed. Then I'll have Jors escort you to the summer garden, my lord. I'm sure you'll find the lunch enlightening. I'm sure I will. After saying his goodbyes to both Willa and Winifred, and congratulating his granddaughter on her betrothal, saying how happy he was that he'd soon be able to call the Manderleys kin, something which made Wyman's chest puff out in pride. Wyman watched as instead of going to his table, John sat with more of the northern lords and seemed to pay attention to one young lad in particular. Wireless, that boy, who is he? He asked his son, not recognizing the boy John was speaking to. That's Roos's lad. John beat him in the finale, Domeric. Roos's heir. That was interesting, as his father hadn't come here or left the Dreadfort in a long while. He resolved to find out more about the boy, and had he been anyone else's son other than Roose Bolton's, he may have asked Willa to speak to him. But he'd not have his granddaughter near a flayed man if he could help it. Wyman found he rested the morning seemed to crawl along. He met with Kevin and spoke of the deal they were doing with the Valerians. Kevin wondering why they were giving them such a large cut before they then spoke on Raymond Derry. The king had wished them both brought into the associate trade and had promised that whatever shortfall they found wouldn't come from his end or Kevin's for long. You know why he wishes this, Kevin. I know. It just seems like we're giving them coin. Even the ships Orain has brought to us don't compare to our own. Which is why we have them doing runs down the Essos coast. We're not losing much on this, and you know, John, if he says we'll earn it back then, I believe him. I do too. It's just gods. Have you seen the hat? Kevin asked, and Wyman laughed loudly. And here I had thought to buy you one similar, he said, and Kevin laughed this time. We should both get one, even if only for the next time we meet with him. Aye, we should. Wyman, you should come visit Lannisport, Wyman. I'm sure Dorna would love to have you to our home. I will. We'll arrange it soon. You have my word on it, Kevin, Wyman said as they were interrupted by yours. I need to go. We'll speak later, Kevin. Aye, Kevin said with a nod. He followed after John's guard, walking down the corridor and then out to a garden, finding John sitting at a table with Lady Olenna and her grandson, all three of them speaking softly. It was John himself who noticed him first and rose to his feet, Wyman bidding the older woman and the young man to remain seated as he took his own. Lord Wyman, may I introduce you to Lady Olenna and Lord Willis Tyrell? My lady, Lord Willis. Lord Manderley, the young man said as the Queen of Thorns just looked at him. You can of course speak freely here, my lord. You're among friends, John said, trying to put him at ease. Not that he needed to. Of course, John. I'm puzzled, though, as to the nature of this meeting, he asked. I believe you and Lady Olenna can both help each other out. The Reach's goods, I have no doubt, would be much appreciated in Essos, and given the way the ice cabins work, they are now much more easily transported. I could see how that would work, he said, his mind turning over the possibilities. I'm sure that both of you and Lord Willis can come to an arrangement that is mutually beneficial, my lord. I hope you'll forgive me if I don't stay, John said, standing up, and he bid them all to keep their seats as he walked away. Wyman found that the lady wished them to have their lunch before they discussed business, though it was soon clear from her questions that she was also taking the measure of him. The small barbs at his weight soon stopped, and whatever test she had put him through, he had clearly passed. John thinks very highly of you, Lord Wyman, Olenna said, looking at him. As do I him, my lady. I believe congratulations are in order. My lord, John told us of his brother and your granddaughter, Lord Willis said. A happy match, my lord, much like John's own, he said, and saw Olenna smirk. I think the verbal jousting can be dispensed with, Wyman, Olenna said. It can, Olenna, Our own fruits and the arbor's wines, along with grains and some other items, would be best to start with, I would think, Olenna said. I'd keep the grain, my lady, the fruits, though there is a large market for, the wine also, for yourself, though perhaps the fruits would be best, he said, offering her the chance for House Tyrell's greatest profit. It would, but we must share the wealth, Wyman. I think John wishes for us all to prosper. He does, he said with a smile. By the time he was done, he'd organized a truly incredible deal. The Lannisters, too, would benefit, as they would use both his and Kevin's ships, 4 in total on this route alone. Working it out in his head when he walked back to his room to prepare for the end feast that night, Wyman would more than treble the outlay they were giving Raymond and Montford. John once again proving true to his word, and if the demand increased, something which he had no doubt it would, the ice trade in Essos being a good example of that, then it would be far more before it was done. He found himself whistling as he dressed, growing strong. Olenna had called it, and he couldn't agree more. It had been all he had been doing since the tourney of Lannisport, Highgarden, 295 AC, Oberyn. He had spoken to his nephew after Jaime had asked him, but he had gone a different way about it, instead using Ilaria to get his point across. His paramour was far better while not making the boy feel guilty, putting across just how important he was to all of them. Not just he as the king, but John, the boy he was and the man he would be. Oberyn had only needed to sit back and watch. Are you to be so careless with your life in a true fight, nephew? Ilaria said. Aye. Has our family not lost enough? You are all that remains. You are Ilya and Aegon and Rhaenys. You are Rhaegar and Lyanna. John, if you fall, then it was all for nothing. Ilaria said, They are my friends. Is it not right I try to protect them? What of how we'd feel if you fall, John? What of Marjorie? Ilaria said, and even Oberyn looked to her, but just saw her shaking her head, and so he said nothing. Forget that there are those who wish to see you crowned nephew. There are those of us who wish to see you grow old and have a family of your own. I'm sorry, Aunt. Good, now, next time you will think more clearly. Don't upset me, nephew. I may seem nice, but I'm really not, Ilaria said before hugging John and smiling at him over the boy's head. You are nice, fierce but nice. John whispered, and Oberyn saw Ilaria kiss the boy's cheek. He had to hand it to her. The boy who had left their room was certainly more aware of how his being harmed affected those around him. When he had asked her about why she had gone so heavy, Ilaria just laughed. Unlike Obara, John would actually listen to her, she had said. Seeing him now at the end feast, he could see that the boy had clearly done that. Around the room, the feast felt different. More like there was a reason for it compared to some of the ones they'd attended while here. Giving that the prizes and each of the champions would be honored and that it was almost time to depart Highgarden, he himself had looked more forward to it. Nym and Tyene were flirting with some knights of the Stormlands, and Lord Renly was sitting with the Tyrells making conversation with a clearly bored Marjorie, while Obara sat with them beside the Lords of the North, both Ilaria and he finding the Northerners far more pleasant company than some of the others. The Lannisters had treated his paramour, as she deserved to be treated. Lady Olenna, too, had treated her well. Mace, though, be it because of him, or his own bigotry, had not. Your graces, my lord and ladies, it's time for the prize-giving, a herald said before calling up Prince Jalabhar to collect his prize for winning the archery. I thank you, Lord Tyrell, your graces. Jalabhar said the note for 5,000 gold dragons in his hand. He watched then as John walked up to collect his prize for the horse race, Willis standing up to present it. Congratulations to you, John. Perhaps a stallion to go with your mare? Willis asked, and handed John the note for the 1,000 gold dragons that he was sure his nephew would find some way to gift away. The small dagger he now carried just one example of John's generosity. I thank you, my lord. I believe a stallion to be most welcome, John said as he walked back to his seat. It was Walder's turn next with 10,000 gold dragons his prize, though it was the respect of the warriors in the room the man had truly earned, and it was Sir Garland who presented this prize. Well done, Sir Walder. I think I speak for all in this room when I say it was an incredible performance, Sir Garland said, handing him the note. I thank you, Sir Garland, Walder said humbly. Sir Walder, your king wishes to speak to you, Robert said, and Oberyn almost laughed loudly at the ridiculousness of the statement. The fat stag no more Walder's king than he was his. Your Grace? Walder said, looking to Robert. A fine performance, sir. Were you guarding any other man than Ned's lad, I'd ask you to join the King's Guard. Robert said through excited whispers of those thinking they'd see a new one cloaked. Were I guarding anyone else, Your Grace, then I would consider it. But my grandmother's last wish was for me to protect a lad she thought of as kin, and so my life is sworn to another. Then the realm's loss is young John's gain. Sir Walder and I and his father can rest easy knowing that you stand at his back. Your Grace, Walder said with a small bow. The king then got up to go do what he far too loudly said was a piss, and so they had to wait until he returned, though he then surprised them all when he did so and didn't take his seat. When John walked up to collect his second prize, even Oberyn could feel the tension in the room, the way the king was looking at him, forcing both his and Arthur's hands to their hips. I asked Lord Tyrell to allow me to present this prize myself, so forgive me for not taking my seat, the king said to a quietened room. A few years ago I saw a boy fight in a squire's duel and at no more than 6 name days show his mettle. Lord Jaime told me then that these boys were the future. These were the future knights of the realm. He looked on as Sir Barristan walked to the king and as he pulled out his sword and handed it to Robert. Jon Snow, your king asked you to take a knee. He watched then as Jon looked to Barristan, who nodded, and then did as the king bid. Rise, Sir John, rise now as a knight of the realm, the king said and tapped him on both shoulders. He, Jon, Arthur, Jaime, all of them looked on in disbelief. He saw Jon's sisters smiling broadly and saw Marjorie subtly wipe her eyes. But it was Jon's expression which he'd remember later. While he smiled, Oberyn could see it was forced, his teeth pressing down hard on themselves. He was sure it was only the sound of the clapping that covered the grinding of the boy's teeth or the stiffness of his words when he spoke. I thank you, Your Grace, for this honor, Jon said, and Oberyn was relieved to see the broad smile on Robert's face and the fact he looked to Ned Stark more than Jon after it. It is we who are honored, Sir Jon. Robert then said. Robert handed Barristan back his sword and slapped Jon hard on the back before walking back to the table. The rest of the night passed quickly. Jon seemed almost lost in his head, so much so that Ilaria got worried about him. They were speaking on it in his room after the feast had ended when the knock came to the door. Prince Oberyn, if you'd follow me, George said softly. He followed him outside, walking through the corridors and out into the garden, surprised to see ghosts sitting there waiting for them. All 3 of them then walking to the secluded area at the back, and when he got there he saw Jon, Arthur, Jaime, and Sir Barristan, and it was clear Jon was angry. Good, you made it, Jaime said, and he nodded to him before looking to Jon Neal. Jaime said to Jon, and Oberyn looked as confused as his nephew did. Neal, why? Jon asked, and Jaime just put his hand on the boy's shoulder, and he then did as he was bid while Jaime took his sword out. Jaehaerys Targaryen, in the name of the warrior I charge you to be brave. In the name of the father I charge you to be just. In the name of the mother I charge you to defend the young and the innocent. And in the name of the maid I charge you to protect all women. Arise, Sir Jaehaerys, a true knight of the realm, Jaime said as he placed his sword back in his hilt. Thank you, Jon said. And Oberyn could see the tears in his nephew's eyes. Highgarden, 295 AC, Renly. His squire took his nipple in his mouth, the boy's lips and tongue sending a surge straight to his groin, and he felt himself stiffen. But the day was upon them, and the keep was far too busy. Noises in the night were one thing, as they would be drowned out by the other noises. Noises in the quietness of the early morn, however, would not. So reluctantly, he moved the boy from his chest and kissed his lips before rising. As he dressed, he looked back at the bed and saw the boy's pert arse uncovered, the sheet having fallen off him, and he sighed, wishing it was still night or that he was back in Storm's End. As he finished dressing, he told the boy to get up and get ready for the day, and as he did so, Renly found himself thinking that there was nothing so beautiful or so tempting in this world as a boy on the cusp of manhood. His squire was one of Lady Merton's grandsons, the youngest and prettiest of them all, a lad of 3 and 10 name days. Michael had come into his service less than a year ago and into his bed not long after. He only wished it had been sooner, and then he'd not be in the predicament that he now was. Once they were both ready, they walked to break their fasts, and he knew that the mockingbird would come to call not long after. "My lord, you seem troubled." "Right do you," Michael said, and Renly just shook his head. "No, it's just the early morning and not being fully awake," he said. And they walked into the room. Taking his seat, he looked to see Marjorie sitting with the Starks, Lannisters, her brother, and the new knight. His eyes going from Loras to Jon Snow. Both were handsome boys, he felt, and while at first it was Loras who had grabbed his attention, it soon became the Stark bastard who did so. No boy should look that pretty, he thought and sighed, before he then smelt the mint behind him. "Lord Renly, Lord Baelish, come join us," he said reluctantly. "I will, my lord, thank you," Littlefinger said, taking a seat. "A fine tourney, was it not? Surprising in so many ways." Littlefinger said, "It was. I long to return home, though. My lord, I find the time here to seem almost endless." "It has been long, but worthwhile, I hope. Besides, we could never miss the lady's name-day feast after accepting her family's hospitality for so long now, could we?" Littlefinger said pointedly. "Of course not, my lord. I assume you purchased a suitably impressive gift, my lord." Littlefinger said, looking at him. "I hope so, though it seems my attempts to impress the lady have at least been more successful than the prince's," he said with a smirk. "For now, my lord, though I shall be most pleased if you prove true." Watching the man leave, he cursed ever getting involved with him, cursed his attraction, and the lengths he'd gone to deny it. It had been bad enough not being able to perform with the girl, but when he became aroused upon seeing her brother the brothel keeper had quickly pounced. "We never judge, nor do we deny what our clients request, Lord Renly. We are here to provide a service, to indulge their desires, and to help them fulfill their greatest wishes," Littlefinger had said with a smile. Fulfill them he had, over and over again, and when Littlefinger asked for a favor, he knew he was fucked. Were he being blackmailed over a woman? Then he could go to Robert. His brother would have taken the man's head. He had even considered sending men after him himself, but in the end had relented. "Get close to the Rose. They wish to be tied to the royal family, and you're a member, are you not? Get close to her, offer the betrothal, and all of this goes away. Do this right, my lord, and you remain in my favor, and there are delights I can offer you've not even thought of." "And if I do it wrong?" he asked worriedly. "Lord Renly, we really don't need to think about that now, do we?" As he watched Littlefinger walk away, he saw Marjorie laugh at something Jon Snow said. He knew he was far closer to failure than success. When he saw the boy smile and saw Marjorie touch his shoulder, he felt his jealousy rise, not at the boy, but at the girl, as he wished the hand to be his. "I dislike that man," Michael said when Littlefinger had left the room. "Everyone dislikes that man. Come eat up. We have a long day ahead of us, and I feel myself up for a ride." "That quiet place by the stream, my lord?" Michael asked eagerly. I think so. It took them another hour to get their horses ready, and Michael and his guards rode out, and soon he was glad of the solitude. He was surprised no one came here. That so lost were they in the keep and the gardens. They missed the beauty of this place, the serenity. They crossed the stream, and after leaving his guards outside, they entered into the cave, the dark pool at the back, their destination once again. He was undressing before he reached it. Michael was even quicker than he, and within a moment they were covered in the cool water, the boy swimming towards him. As he felt his lips on his, as he felt his hand on his chest, he couldn't help but think that it would be nice to stay in this cave forever. Highgarden, 295 AC, Marjorie. As she broke her fast, laughing and japing with John, Loris, and the rest, she thought this was her best name day by far. Not only was she looking forward to the feast later, knowing that she'd get her presents and her dance with John, but it was also the fact of being able to spend the whole day with him and with her friends. Despite not needing to spend time with the prince, and not being forced to because of how he acted, she had still needed to act proper. So she and John had been close, but not too close, and she had, instead of spending all her time with her friends, done as she was bid and played the gracious hostess. She found out quickly, though, that some of the people she had to be with were either dull or had their own agendas. Right, shall we go for our ride? John asked. Aye, that sounds like a fine idea, Laura said, both boys looking to her. You would have me ride dressed like this? She said, smirking. Yes, on second thoughts, hands up, who thinks we should leave Marjorie behind? John said, and she glowered at him, even more, when Joy raised her hand up and giggled. Very well then, since I'm not wanted, she said, pretending to be hurt. Oh, please forgive us, my lady. Why, only a day and night, and I'm already failing to protect the fair maiden. Whatever shall I do? John said, and she giggled as she slapped his shoulder, finding her hand unwilling to leave it. I and the rest of these fair ladies will make ready. You boys can look after the horses as penance for John's laxity. She said to giggles from the girls and frowns from the boys, John smirking at her, prompting her to stick her tongue out at him as they left. When they arrived outside, she was happy to see all the horses lined up, and so she, Sansa, Mira, her cousins, Arya, Lyanna, and Joy, along with Winifred and Willa, mounted, and the party set off. They wouldn't be riding too far, but all in all, there was a rather large group, and pretty soon they began to separate into smaller ones. Ahead of her, Joy was trying to get Arya and Lyanna to race her. Cragen and Robb rode with Winifred and Willa, while Laura spoke to Sansa, Mira, and her cousins, leaving her alone to speak to John, who rode close to her. Her true knight now, and she still couldn't help but smile at that. She had been so happy for him, even when he himself was not, and after he told her why and what had happened later, she found him more willing to celebrate, something they had done early the next morning by taking a few far too brief moments together to walk through her favorite parts of Highgarden's gardens. Now, as he brought winter even closer, she began to wonder what gift he had gotten her, knowing that he had gotten her something special. What? She said when she caught him looking at her. You're so pretty when you're thinking, John said, and she looked at him with her eyebrow raised and her lopsided smile on her face. I'm not sure I like you putting limits on my prettiness, she said, and he laughed loudly, as if anyone could. He said when he was done, So, have you gotten me a present? She asked teasingly. A present? For why, my lady, is there some event coming up which would require me to do so? He said, looking at her, his face blank. John, Marjorie. John, she said, and they both began to laugh. Of course I got you a present. Just Marjorie, he said then, and she began to wonder what it could be. May I ask what it may be, Just John? You may ask. I'll not tell, but you may ask, he said. And she giggled. The rest of the day was spent playing around. John told them all the story of good Queen Alysanne, and she found herself entranced as the others were in how he told it. She, like the rest of the girls, almost swooned as he described what Jaehaerys and Alysanne had together, her eyes searching for his throughout and finding him looking at her each time. She was almost unwilling to head back to the Highgarden when the time came, but John whispered in her ear that she'd not get her present if she did not, and so she reluctantly agreed. I look forward to our dance. Just Marjorie, he said later as they walked towards her room. As do I, Just John, she said. Looking around and seeing they were alone, she then leaned forward to kiss his lips. The dress she had made was already laid out, and after taking a warm bath and calling for the maids, she was joined by her mother, who would be doing her hair herself. She felt nervous when she walked to the grand hall, the king and queen standing in front of her, the prince off to one side. While she'd not be sitting with him, protocol demanded he accompany her, and so she stood beside him, but she refused his arm when offered. Taking her seat, she looked around to find John and soon saw him. His hair was tied back, and she wished to run and grab whatever it was he used to do so. Instead, though she found herself looking at his face, seeing him smiling at her, and so forgot about his hair for now. The courses were her favorites, and she sent the first course down to her friends, knowing she could get away with it as it was her name day. "You look incredible, my dear," her father said, leaning in close, and she turned and kissed his cheek. "Thank you, Father, for this. It's wonderful," she said, and he blushed and blustered, and so she kissed his cheek once again. All too soon the time came for her presents. The king and queen gave her a small but exquisite jewelry box, which she thanked them for. Her father gave her a matching necklace and earring set, and her grandmother gave her a beautifully drawn book. Willis gave her a set of prize hawks, and Garland and Leonette an absolutely incredible tapestry. As the gifts piled up, she found herself looking forward to her friend's presence, and it was Sansa who came up first. "Lady Marjorie, I hope you like it, and accept this gift from someone most happy to call you a friend." "I thank you, Lady Sansa," she said as she opened the package. The lace inside was so delicate it could barely be seen. Her friend had made her shawl covered with both golden and blue roses, the winter rose of the north, and as she looked at it, she began to see a pattern. She thanked her once again and brought the shawl to her lap so it was out of sight, and when she fixed it into how it would be worn, she smiled beamingly. How she had done it she didn't know, but the roses formed a garland, a crown of winter ones with the golden ones leading up to it. Loras gave her a comb and brush. Both were silver yet engraved with the golden rose, and as she lifted them she felt how incredibly light they were. As he walked back to his seat, it was then that she saw him, and she felt her heart almost stop in anticipation as she looked at the box in his hand. "Lady Marjorie, in honor of you, name day, I hope you like it," John said. And she knew his simplicity of words was due to those around them. "I thank you, Sir John," she said and smiled as she opened it. The pin was ivory and had a green and blue gemstone set in the middle of it. It was incredibly pretty, and yet she felt a little disappointed. She smiled and looked to John to see he was watching her intently. Knowing there was something she was missing, she took the pin and placed it on her dress and saw him smile back at her as he walked to his table. She was glad by the time the dancing started, though annoyed it took so long to finally get to dance with John. She had needed to endure a dance with the prince, the first of the night, and then a dance with Lord Renly, whose tiara seemed an odd choice for a gift to her mind. Though his conversation with her was more annoying than that, and when John strode forward after their dance, she was almost happy to see the glare he directed at the Lord. "I do not like that man," John said as they danced. "I wonder why," she said back with a giggle, forcing his attention to turn to her. "Can we meet later? There's something I wish to do," he asked, and she nodded. "I'll send yours when it's clear." "Thank you for your gift," she said, smiling. "Do you like it?" "I do. It's simple," he said. And though she wished not to, she found herself agreeing. "I have so few things which belong to my family, even less of them that could be gifted. That pin is one of them. It belonged to Shiera Seastar, and she gifted it to the man she loved, Brendan Rivers. When I met with my uncle at the wall, he gave me that and some other things." She almost felt herself begin to cry, and so instead she placed her head on his shoulder and she closed her eyes. He had been even more thoughtful than ever and given her something he could or would give no one else. While the music played and she danced, she found herself thinking about his gift, even more, his gift, one of love. Highgarden, 295 AC, John. Since the victory in the melee, he had rushed around as if he had no time whatsoever, fitting in so much over the next few days that he had barely had time to catch a breath. He had spoken to Beric and to Demerit Bolton, inviting both to Casterly Rock. He and Richard had gone over some plans, and he'd tried to meet with as many people as he could. While Robert was a king who didn't do his duty, Jon had found out to his dismay that the duty left no time for anything else. He knew he would need to organize his time better. He and Jaime would need to sit down and discuss things, and he would need to delegate even more than he had already done so. On top of that, though, he had been feeling guilty over not being with his friends when they had needed him in the melee, something that they, Jaime, Oberyn, and even his Uncle Ned had all told him he was being stupid about. It got their points, it really did. But it didn't make it feel any lesser to him. He didn't feel any less guilty until Ilaria pointed out what it was that he risked. After that, he began to understand it a little better, though he then found himself blindsided by being named a knight by a man he had no respect and quite a bit of hatred for. He had been ashamed to kneel in front of the man, and he wondered if he was now to wear his knighthood as a badge of that shame. But after Jaime knighted him later that night, he had explained it to him. Jon Snow doesn't exist. He's who you've been forced to be, and his knighthood means whatever you wish it to. Jaehaerys Targaryen is who you are. He is my king, and I knighted him because no man deserves it more than he. So he had welcomed it, and when people called him Sir, it was to Jaime he looked. He also knew that it gave him even more of an opportunity in regards to Tommen. That he had now been knighted by his father made it even more likely he could get the boy as his squire. Tonight, though, all of that seemed forgotten. Instead, as it always was, it was Margaery. He found himself thinking on. His gift had been warmly received, but he knew it had confused her, and he wished to speak to her on it. You could at least pretend you wished to dance with me. I could also ask Arya to dance instead, he said, and Sansa glared at him. No, you promised me more than one dance, and you're a knight now, and knights can't break promises to ladies, she said as she stuck her tongue out at him. You are a lady tonight, not a little bird, he said. And she looked at him. I wasn't, Sansa, I saw you. I know it's tempting, but you can't. And more than that, you shouldn't do it all the time. I know, Jon, it's just, how do you not? She asked, her voice full of genuine curiosity. I only do it when it needs to be done. I check in on Ghost every so often and I keep the links attached, but I don't do it for fun. It's too dangerous. She asked worriedly. Not with Ghost or Fang. We're tied to them as they are to us, but with other animals, birds especially. Why birds? We can see things down here all the time. Even though the wolves had better vision or smell and our own is heightened when we're with them, we can still understand it. But we can't fly, so, he said, letting her figure it out for herself. So when we do, we can get lost in it. Aye, so be careful. I prefer my sister to a little bird, he said with a chuckle. I will, Sansa said, kissing his cheek. He eventually got his chance to dance with Margaery, and seeing her wear the pin made him long to tell her the truth of it, even though his mind had been racing all day with the thoughts of another truth. She had been surprised at the story, and he knew then she had been initially disappointed with the gift, but thankfully once he'd explained, she had welcomed it. The rest of the night went by in a blur, and all he could think of was of meeting her later, of seeing her there, and of what he wished to say and do. Laying on his bed, he went searching for his sister, finding her and Lygaron to be sleeping in the cave, and both were happy to feel Tyrion's presence near them. He didn't speak to Rhaenys and instead allowed her to rest. He instead getting up and dressing. The red shirt and black outfit was one he'd not worn in some time. Once ready, he left his room, sending Ghost and Jorah's to Margaery's while he and Walder walked outside the keep. You are sure of this, Jon? Walder asked. I am. You can do it? I can if you're sure, Walder said, and he nodded, relaxing the man. When Jorah and Margaery met up with them, he leaned in and whispered in her ear, after which she looked him in the eye and nodded before she moved forward to kiss him. Holding her hand, they walked through the gardens and eventually made it to their destination. The three singers seemed to shine in the moonlight, and leaving Margaery with Jorah, he walked and took his place, Walder standing in front of him. Who comes before the old gods this night? Walder said, keeping his voice low, though it still echoed loudly in the quietness of the night. Jon turned his head and looked back a few feet away to see Margaery and Jorah standing there. Margaery of House Tyrell comes here to be wed. A woman grown, true-born and noble, she comes to beg the blessings of the gods. Who comes to claim her? Jorah said. Jaehaerys of House Targaryen, rightful king of the Andals, Rhoynar and the first men comes to claim his queen, who gives her. He said, surprised at how firm his voice was. Sir Jors of House White Wolf, Kingsguard to the rightful king and queen. Jors said as he and Marjorie walked the final few feet and joined them. Lady Marjorie, do you take this man? Walder asked. I take this man. Jaehaerys Targaryen, do you take this woman? I take this woman, Jon said, taking her hand in his and leading her to the tree. What the gods have joined in this sacred oath is true and forever. Let it be known that Jaehaerys and Marjorie are one now and always. Walder said. Jon knelt down with Marjorie following and bowing his head. He prayed to the old gods. He prayed to make his wife happy, to keep her safe, and vowed to love her always. Standing back up, he looked in her eyes, saw her smile, and moved closer to kiss her, holding his wife in his arms and wishing he'd never have to let her go.